Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something truly unsettling, Victorian hygiene, or more accurately, the almost complete absence of it. We're talking about an era where bathing was considered medically dangerous, where people drank from rivers that were basically open sewers, and where a simple cut could kill you because nobody washed their hands. Ever. So before we get into the grime, go ahead and hit that like button if you're ready for some historical horror. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because misery loves company, and we're all about to feel very grateful for modern plumbing. Now, maybe grab some hand sanitizer. Seriously. You're going to want it after this. Let's talk about what it was really like to live in the world's most powerful empire while covered in your own filth. Congratulations! You've been born into the Victorian era, specifically London, 1853. You didn't choose this. Nobody asked if you wanted to arrive in a century where bathing is considered medically dangerous and your neighbour's empty chamber pots out of second-story windows with nothing more than a cheerful shout of warning. But here you are, taking your first breath of air, so thick with coal smoke and human waste that it has texture. The midwife who delivers you doesn't wash her hands, not before, not after, not ever really. She's helped birth 17 babies this month, attended 4 deaths, and prepared last night's dinner, all with the same pair of hands, unwashed since Tuesday. She considers this normal. Everyone does. The concept of germs won't be widely accepted for another 30 years, and even then, people will resist it like it's a personal insult. Your mother lies in bed, recovering. She hasn't bathed in 3 months. This isn't laziness or depression. This is medical advice. Her doctor, a respected man with impressive sideburns and a degree from a real university, has explicitly forbidden bathing during pregnancy and for 6 weeks after birth. Water, he explains with great authority, opens the pores and allows disease to enter the body. Your mother, being a sensible woman who doesn't want to die, has followed his instructions perfectly. She smells like a combination of sweat, old milk, and something indefinable that makes visitors breathe through their mouths. The room you're born in hasn't been properly aired in weeks. Victorian medical theory holds that night air is poisonous, so windows stay shut after sunset. During the day, they remain mostly closed to keep out the London fog, which is less fog and more a choking mixture of coal smoke, industrial emissions, and vaporized horse manure. The wallpaper is a lovely green, colored with arsenic. It's slowly poisoning everyone in the house, but it's fashionable, so no one complains. Well, people complain about the headaches and the stomach problems, but they blame those on moral failings and bad humors, not the wallpaper that's literally releasing toxic gas every time it gets damp. Your first bath happens 3 days after birth. Your mother protests, insisting it's too soon, too dangerous, but your grandmother insists with a kind of authority only Victorian grandmothers possess. The bath water is used by 4 people before it gets to you. Your grandfather bathed first, then your father, then your 2 older brothers. By the time you're lowered into it, the water is grey and has a film on top that catches the lamplight. This is normal. This is economical. Heating water is expensive and time-consuming. The fire has to be built up. The water carried from the communal pump 3 streets, over where it emerges already questionable, then heated in the massive copper pot in the scullery. Using the same bath water for the entire family just makes sense. Your older brother, age 7, hasn't bathed in 2 months. His hair is stiff with grace and stands up in interesting directions. Your mother calls this training the hair. He smells like old cheese and dirt. The dirt is layered, archaeological. There's mud from last week, soot from yesterday, and something sticky from this morning's breakfast that's attracted flies. His hands are black up to the wrists, not with dye, but with ground in filth that's become part of him. When he does finally bathe, the water will turn solid black, and a ring around the tub will remain that requires actual scraping to remove. Your sister, age 12, bathes more frequently than your brother, approximately once a month. because she's approaching marriageable age and must be presentable. However, she's never allowed to fully submerge. Ladies don't. She wears a bathing costume in the bath, a thick cotton shift that ensures nothing inappropriate happens. The idea of seeing one's own naked body is scandalous. She washes what she can reach through the wet fabric, which isn't much. Her mother supervises to ensure no immodesty occurs. Afterward, she doesn't dry properly, just pats the bathing costume and puts her regular clothes over the dampness. She'll smell like mildew for 3 days, but at least she's maintained her virtue. The house you live in is typical for a lower, middle-class family. 3 stories, narrow, packed between identical houses like books on a shelf. There's no bathroom because bathrooms haven't been invented yet, not in homes anyway. There's a privy in the back courtyard, shared with 3 other families. It's a wooden box over a pit. The pit is emptied once a month by night soil men, who shovel the contents into carts and sell it to farmers. Usually. Sometimes they're late. Sometimes they're very late. Sometimes the pit overflows, and everyone just tries not to think about it while stepping carefully in the courtyard. The privy has no door, just a bit of sacking for privacy. There's no toilet paper, just old newspaper, leaves, or whatever's handy. Your father considers the newspaper a luxury. His father used stones, smooth ones, carefully selected. Your mother keeps a supply of old correspondence and wrapping paper for this purpose. Letters from relatives you've never met end their journey wiping someone's bottom. It's pragmatic. Paper is expensive. Use it twice. Chamber pots are the nighttime solution. Every bedroom has one, ceramic, often decorative, always functional. They sit in plain view because where else would they go? Shame about bodily functions is complicated in Victorian times. People are simultaneously prudish and practical. No one discusses what happens in the chamber pot, but everyone hears it, knows it, and empties it the next morning into the communal cesspit or directly into the street gutter with a shouted warning. The warning is considered polite. Some people don't bother. Your mother's chamber pot has a lid and a pattern of roses. Your brothers share one without a lid. It fills quickly. The smell by morning is substantial, a presence in the room that everyone ignores through long practice. Emptying it is your oldest brother's chore. He performs it with the resentful efficiency of someone who knows that complaining means getting assigned something worse. Sometimes he spills. The floorboards are stained in a way that no amount of scrubbing will fix. Not that anyone scrubs very hard. Water is heavy to carry, and the floors will just get dirty again. You grow. By age 2, you've developed a cough. Everyone has a cough. The air itself is toxic. London's famous fog is actually smog. A portmanteau that won't be invented for another century, but describes perfectly the brown, yellow soup that passes for atmosphere. It tastes metallic and leaves black residue on everything. Your mother wipes your face once daily with a damp cloth. The cloth turns grey immediately. She doesn't rinse it, just hangs it to dry and uses it again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, until it's stiff enough to stand on its own. Your clothes are wool, practical and warm. They're also never washed. Wool washing is a specialized procedure done perhaps once a year if you're lucky. Between washings, the garments are brushed vigorously to remove visible dirt and aired outside when weather permits. Your trousers could probably walk to the privy by themselves. They're shiny in places from compressed filth and body oils. They smell like every meal you've eaten while wearing them, every street you've walked, every surface you've sat on. This is the smell of Victorian childhood, and you're so used to it you don't notice. Underwear, called small clothes, is changed more frequently. Once a week if you're prosperous, once a month if you're not. The theory is that small clothes absorb the body's impurities and protect the outer garments. This is partly true. They do absorb things: sweat, oils, other fluids. By the end of a week, they could be classified as biological hazards. But fabric is expensive, and cleaning is labor-intensive, so you make do. Everyone makes do. Your sister's undergarment situation is more complex. She started wearing a corset, as all respectable young women must. The corset is never washed. Never. It's made of cotton, whalebone, and steel, and washing would destroy its shape. She wears it every day, laced tight enough to make breathing an active choice. She sweats in it, sleeps in it sometimes when she's too tired to unlace, and lives in it for years. The smell is aggressive. The fabric is stained with sweat maps that tell stories of summers past. The armpits of her dresses have similar geography. Yellow-brown territories that expand yearly. These stains are permanent. They're expected. A woman without sweat stains might be considered ill or unnaturally cold. Deodorant doesn't exist yet. Antiperspirant is decades away. People smell like people intensely and unavoidably. Your father smells like tobacco, wool, leather, beer, and sweat that's been steeping in the same shirt for 2 weeks. Your mother smells like cooking smoke, old milk from nursing babies, unwashed hair, and the particular sweetness of long-term body odor. Your siblings smell like wet dog and old cheese. You smell like a small, unwashed animal. This is so normal that the word for it, body odor, won't be used pejoratively for another 50 years. Right now, it's just how humans smell. Rich people smell better, but not much. They have more clothes to rotate through, can afford more frequent laundry service, and use more perfume and powder. But they also follow the same medical advice about bathing being dangerous. Queen Victoria herself bathes infrequently, considering it an ordeal. Her doctors recommend against it. The nobility, with access to unlimited hot water and servants to prepare baths, still typically bathe once a month at most. They mask their smell with perfume, heavy floral scents that mix with body odor to create something arguably worse than either component alone. Your hair is a disaster. Your mother cuts it short with sheep shears, the same ones she uses for actual sheep. The cut is uneven but practical. Hair harbors lice, she explains, so less hair means less lice. This logic is sound but incomplete. You have lice anyway. Everyone has lice. They're considered a normal part of life, like breathing or rain. Your mother checks your head weekly, crushing lice between her thumbnails with practiced efficiency. The popping sound is familiar and oddly satisfying. She doesn't wash your hair in the process, just examines it, picks through it with her fingers, and maybe rubs in some oil that's supposed to discourage nits. It doesn't work, but tradition is tradition. Your scalp itches constantly. You scratch until you bleed. Your fingernails, black with dirt, carry the dirt into the scratches. Some get infected. Your mother puts a poultice on the worst ones, a mixture of bread and milk that's supposed to draw out the poison. Instead, it just gets moldy and has to be scraped off. The infection clears eventually, or it doesn't. If it doesn't, you might die. Childhood in Victorian times is a constant negotiation with death. Your mother has buried 3 children already. Their graves are in the churchyard, small stones with dates that cluster together. Fever took 2 of them. The third drowned in the Thames while playing, though drowned is generous. The Thames is less water and more liquid filth. He probably died of what he swallowed. The Thames is worth discussing because it's central to London life and London death. It's the city's sewer, its water source, its highway, and its cesspool. Everything goes into the Thames. Raw sewage from millions of people, waste from slaughterhouses, chemical runoff from factories, dead animals, occasionally dead people. It's black, it bubbles with decomposition gases, and it smells so bad that Parliament, located on its banks, has to soak its curtains in chloride of lime just to make sessions tolerable. This same river provides London's drinking water. Your family's water comes from a pump that draws from an underground pipe that draws from the Thames. The water emerges brown. This is normal. Your mother lets it settle in a bucket overnight, so the worst sediment sinks to the bottom. The water you drink comes from the top of the bucket and is merely murky rather than completely opaque. It tastes like mud and something else, something organic and wrong. You're used to it. Cholera and typhoid are regular visitors to your neighborhood, sweeping through in waves that everyone attributes to bad air rather than bad water. The medical establishment is certain that disease spreads through miasma, through poisonous vapors. The idea that tiny invisible creatures in the water might be responsible is considered fringe science practiced by cranks. You drink this water. You cook with this water. On the rare occasions when you wash with this water. Your mother boils it for tea, which probably saves your life repeatedly, though she doesn't know that. She just knows that tea tastes better than raw water and provides a moment of comfort in a hard day. By age 5, you've lost 2 teeth to rot and 1 to a fight with your brother. Dental care consists of trying not to think about your teeth. There's no brushing. Some wealthy people use tooth powders made from crushed chalk and soap, but these are expensive and not particularly effective. Most people just let their teeth decay naturally, which they do with enthusiasm. Your father, age 40, has 7 teeth left. Your mother, age 35, has 11. These teeth are black, broken stumps that make eating challenging and smiling horrifying. Pain is managed with laudanum when it becomes unbearable. Otherwise, you just live with it. Toothaches are considered character building. Your diet doesn't help. Bread, potatoes, occasional meat, tea with sugar, beer for everyone including children, because it's safer than water. Vegetables are suspicious, possibly poisonous, definitely not necessary. Fruit is a luxury. The result is scurvy, rickets, general malnutrition, and teeth that crumble like chalk. Your legs are slightly bowed. Your growth is stunted. You're constantly tired. This is normal childhood. School starts at age 6. The school is a dame school, run by an elderly woman in her front room. 20 children of various ages pack into a space designed for 4 people. The air is thick enough to see. Every child brings their own smell to contribute to the collective miasma. No one has bathed recently. Everyone's clothes are dirty. The room has 1 window, which is kept closed because of the miasma theory. You sit on benches worn smooth by generations of unwashed children. The teacher has a stick for beating and uses it liberally. Education is harsh because life is harsh, and children need to be prepared. You learn to read, sort of. Write, barely. Do sums when necessary. Mostly you learn to sit still, to speak when spoken to, and to avoid the stick. The schoolroom has a chamber pot in the corner for emergencies. It's used regularly and emptied irregularly. The smell adds to the general atmosphere. No one complains because complaining leads to beatings. The teacher herself smells like old cabbage and gin. Her breath, when she leans close to check your slate, is a weapon. You learn to hold your breath. Lunch is bread, if you brought bread. You eat with hands that haven't been washed. The bread picks up the general dirt from your hands, adding texture and flavor. You share your lunch with your best friend, who shares his lice with you. This is the circle of life in Victorian England. After lunch, there's no hand washing because there's no water for hand washing. You wipe your hands on your trousers and get back to lessons. By age 8, you're big enough for work. Your father finds you a position as a crossing sweeper. Your job is to sweep horse manure off the street crossing, so fancy people can cross without stepping in it. London has horses, thousands of horses, maybe 100,000 horses. Each horse produces 20 to 30 pounds of manure daily. The math is horrifying. The streets are paved with manure. Literally. It piles up in drifts. When it rains, it becomes a slurry that can be ankle deep. When it's dry, it becomes dust that everyone breathes. Your job is to fight this tide with a broom for 12 hours a day. You're good at it. You develop a technique, a smooth sweeping motion that clears a path efficiently. You learn to spot generous, looking pedestrians, and sweep extra diligently in front of them. Sometimes they tip. A penny buys bread. A half-penny buys a potato. You save your money in a tin hidden under the floorboard in your shared bedroom. Your brothers know about it, but don't steal from it, because you've proven willing to fight, and you fight dirty. The work is filthy. By the end of a day, you're covered in horse manure, mud, and street sediment. The smell has moved beyond smell into something more like presence. You can feel it on you. in you. Your mother makes you strip in the courtyard before entering the house. Your work clothes stay outside, hanging on a nail. Too disgusting even for your family's relaxed standards. You wear them again tomorrow without washing, because washing would require water, soap, time, an effort that no one has. Your body beneath the clothes isn't much better. You wash your hands and face at the courtyard pump. Cold water, no soap. The dirt is ground in too deep for this to make much difference. You go from black to dark grey. Good enough. Your mother looks you over, deems you acceptable, and lets you eat dinner. The dining table has been scrubbed recently, meaning within the last month. The plates are wiped clean between uses, not washed, just wiped with a rag. The rag is the same one used for everything, cleaning faces, wiping surfaces, occasionally wrapping food. It's grey and stiff and smells like a summarized history of every task it's performed. Dinner is mutton stew, mostly potatoes. The mutton is questionable, bought from a street vendor who sources from who knows where. It tastes like wool and regret. You eat it because you're hungry, because you're always hungry, because growing up working, class Victorian, means being perpetually one meal away from starvation. The stew is filling and hot, and thick with flour to stretch the meat. Everyone eats from the same pot, with their own spoons. The spoons are licked clean and put back in the drawer for tomorrow. After dinner, there's no bath, no washing up, no tooth brushing. You might wash your face if your mother insists, but probably not. You just transition from day dirt to night dirt. Your bed is a mattress shared with your two brothers. The mattress is stuffed with straw that hasn't been changed in 2 years. It's home to fleas, bed bugs, lice that have migrated from heads, and possibly mice. The sheets are changed monthly, meaning they're removed, shaken vigorously out the window, and put back on. Washing sheets is a major undertaking requiring hot water, soap, scrubbing, and drying space. It happens twice a year if you're lucky, once if you're not. The bedroom is cold. There's no heat except what rises from the kitchen below. You sleep in your day clothes for warmth. Your brothers do the same. The three of you pile together like puppies, sharing body heat and parasites. The smell of 3 unwashed boys in a closed room is substantial. The window is shut tight against the poisonous night air. By morning, the room smells like a cave where something died. You don't notice. You've been breathing it all night. Morning arrives with no fanfare. There's no hot water for washing. There's barely cold water. You might splash your face if the pump isn't frozen. More likely, you just wake up and start the day wearing yesterday's dirt like a second skin. Breakfast is bread and tea. The bread is hard. You dip it in tea to soften it. The tea is made from leaves that have been used 3 times already. It tastes like hot brown water, which essentially it is. You go to work, sweep more manure, breathe more dust, come home filthy, eat, sleep, repeat. This is childhood. This is life. The rare bath happens once a month if you're lucky, once a season if you're not. The event is significant enough that neighbours know about it. The Johnsons are having their bath day. They might say, referring to the entire family's annual bathing rotation. When it's your turn, you're 4th in line for water that started hot and clean, but is now lukewarm and grey. You sit in it for 5 minutes, soap yourself minimally with harsh lye soap that burns, and get out. The difference is noticeable but temporary. Within a week, you're back to your normal level of filth. Your hair, when washed, reveals its true colour, which is always a surprise. The rest of the time, it's dirt brown regardless of genetics. Your scalp, exposed to soap and water, protests vigorously. The lice, temporarily displaced, return within days. Your skin, scrubbed raw, feels strange and tight. You smell like lye and wet dog, which is an improvement over how you smelled before, but only just. By age 10, you've developed a permanent cough, a limp from an infected cut that healed badly, and the resigned expression of someone who's learned that life is dirty, painful, and short. Your expectations are calibrated appropriately. You don't dream of being clean, because clean isn't a relevant concept. You dream of having enough food, of not being cold, of maybe owning a pair of boots without holes. These dreams are ambitious enough. The neighbourhood you live in is typical for working class London. Houses packed tight, streets narrow, air thick with smoke from thousands of coal fires. Every chimney contributes to the collective choking. The coal is cheap and dirty, producing black smoke that settles on everything. Laundry hung outside to dry turns grey before it dries. Windows are kept closed not just for warmth, but to keep out the worst of the soot. Still, it infiltrates. Everything is coated in a fine black dust. Wiping it away is futile. It returns immediately. The streets themselves are an adventure in filth. Horse manure, human waste, rotting garbage, dead animals, industrial runoff, all mixing together in a fermenting stew that's ankle deep in places. Crossing the street requires calculation and bravery. You develop a particular walk, a high, stepping gait designed to minimize contact with the street surface. Your boots, such as they are caked permanently in this mixture. The soles are worn through in places, so you feel the street directly, squishing between your toes. You try not to think about what you're feeling. Public houses, pubs, are everywhere. Your father visits his local every night after work. He drinks beer, which is thick and dark, and marginally more nutritious than water. He drinks enough to soften the edges of his day, but not enough to prevent him working tomorrow. The pub is warm and smoky and loud, and absolutely filthy. The floors are sticky with spilled beer and other things. The air is a visible fog of tobacco smoke, body odour, and beer fumes. The glasses are rinsed, not washed, in a bucket of water that serves all night. By closing time, the rinse water is more beer than water. The pub has a privy out back that so foul people often just use the alley instead. The alley smells exactly like you'd expect. The pub keeper occasionally throws a bucket of water down it, which just spreads things around rather than cleaning anything. Rats are common and bold, barely bothering to hide. Cats hunt them, but there are always more rats than cats. This is the eternal London equation. Your mother doesn't go to pubs. Respectable women don't. She stays home, cooking, cleaning in the limited ways that cleaning happens, mending clothes until they're more patch than original fabric. She smells like the kitchen, which smells like old grease, boiled cabbage, and smoke. Her hands are rough and cracked from cold water and lye soap. Her nails are broken and black-rimmed. She's 36 and looks 50. Victorian life ages people the way time lapse photography ages fruit. Your sister is now 15 and in service, working as a housemaid for a wealthy family in Kensington. She lives in, which means she sleeps in the attic with the other servants, shares a bed with another maid, and works 16 hours a day. The house she serves in is cleaner than your home, but still appallingly dirty by modern standards. The servants' quarters are freezing cold and poorly ventilated. She's expected to be clean, meaning her face and hands must be washed daily. Her hair kept neat, her apron changed when it becomes too dirty to be presentable. But she bathes only when permitted, which is monthly. She shares bathwater with the other female servants, going in order of seniority. As the newest maid, she's last. The water by her turn is cold and grey, and has a layer of scum. She washes quickly, in the dark, because modesty. She's never fully undressed to bathe, always wearing a shift that she then wrings out and wears damp. She'll catch her death, the older maids warn, but dying of modesty is preferable to dying of shame. Her hands are in water constantly, washing dishes, scrubbing floors, doing laundry. They're red and raw and cracked. The cracks get infected. She ties rags around the worst fingers and keeps working, because stopping means losing her position. And losing her position means returning home. And home is worse. At least here she eats regularly, even if it's only servants' food. At least here she has her own uniform, even if she washes it herself in cold water once a week. The family she serves is considered hygienic by Victorian standards. They bathe weekly in a proper bathroom with a copper tub and a drain. This is progressive. The master insists on it, despite his doctor's warnings about the dangers of frequent bathing. The servants fill the bath with hot water, carried up from the kitchen, bucket by bucket. The family bathes in order of importance. Master first, then mistress, then children by age. Each person uses the same water. By the time the youngest child bathes, the water is cold and grey, but still, they bathe. Weekly. This is almost scandalous. The family's chamber pots are your sister's responsibility to empty each morning. She carries them downstairs, trying not to spill, trying not to breathe, and dumps them in the cesspit in the garden. Sometimes the cesspit overflows. When it does, a specialist is called to pump it out. The specialist stands knee deep in human waste and pumps it into a cart. He's paid well for this work because no one else will do it. He smells so bad that people cross the street when they see him coming. He's accepted this as his fate. The household does laundry weekly, which is an enormous undertaking. Monday is laundry day. Every Monday. The servants wake at 4 in the morning to start heating water. The copper is filled, the fire is built up, and water is brought to a boil. Clothes are sorted by colour and dirtiness. The whites, such as they are, go first in the hottest, cleanest water. Shirts, shifts, linens, all boiled with soap and soda. They're stirred with a wooden stick, lifted steaming, and scrubbed on a washboard. This takes hours. The steam fills the laundry room, condensing on walls, dripping from the ceiling. Everyone is soaked with sweat and wash water. After the whites come the coloreds, then the heavily soiled items, then the rags. The water gets progressively darker and cooler. Soap is added continuously. By the end, the water is black and thick. It's dumped in the garden, killing a section of grass that never recovers. The clothes are wrung out by hand, a task that leaves your sister's hands aching, then hung in the drying room or outside if weather permits. In winter, they freeze solid and have to be brought in stiff. In summer, they attract flies. The ironing happens Tuesday. A dozen irons of different sizes heat on the stove. Your sister and the other maids work in rotation, taking a hot iron, ironing as much as they can before it cools, returning it to heat, taking another. The work is exhausting and dangerous. Burns are common. A moment's inattention means a scorched garment or a burned hand. The ironing board is set up in the kitchen, which is already hot from cooking. By midday, everyone is dripping with sweat, which drips onto the clean laundry, which then has to be spot cleaned. This weekly laundry is for the family's clothes, linens, and kitchen items. The servants' personal items are washed on their own time, meaning Sunday afternoon, if they're not too exhausted. Most servants wear their clothes until they're visibly dirty, then rinse them quickly in cold water, and wear them damp. Full washing happens monthly if that. It's easier to just accumulate dirt. You still sweeping crossings have no such concerns. Your clothes are expected to be dirty. In fact, too, clean clothes might make you look like you're not working hard enough. You cultivate your dirt. It's proof of labor. Your hands are permanently blackened. Your fingernails have given up on having visible moons. You smell like horse manure, always, even on the rare occasions when you're not actively near horses. It's seeped into your skin, your hair, your very being. By age 12, you're old enough to understand that the world is divided into those who can afford to be slightly less filthy and those who cannot. The wealthy still stink, still rarely bathe, still live in homes where chamber pots sit in bedrooms and streets run with sewage. But they have more clothes to rotate, more servants to carry their water, more perfume to mask their smell. They're not clean. They're just better at hiding the dirt. You see them sometimes, these wealthy people, when they cross your swept path. The ladies in their enormous skirts, multiple petticoats creating a silhouette like a bell. These skirts drag through the street filth, picking up manure, mud, dead things. The hems are brown and stiff with accumulated street. The skirts are so heavy with dirt that they make a sound when walking, a soft swishing scraping that announces their presence. The skirts are never washed, only the outermost layer occasionally, because washing would destroy the shape. The inner petticoats accumulate years of dirt, sweat, and street filth. They're effectively biological time capsules. The ladies wear gloves, always gloves, to protect their hands from dirt and from being seen. The gloves are white or pale, made of kid leather or cotton, and must be kept pristine. This means they're changed multiple times daily. The soiled gloves are sent to be cleaned by specialists who use gasoline and other solvents. The ladies never actually wash the gloves themselves. That would be beneath them. They just generate an endless stream of dirty gloves and fresh gloves, like a magic trick where filth goes in one end and pristine whiteness emerges from the other. The gentlemen wear gloves too, though darker ones that show less dirt. They wear hats, always hats, to protect from sun and rain and the general fallout of existing in Victorian London. The hats are never washed, just brushed regularly. Inside the brim, where sweat accumulates, there's a visible brown stain that grows over the years. This is normal, expected. A well-worn hat is a sign of a gentleman who's owned the same hat for years, which is economical and respectable. Their shirts have detachable collars and cuffs, the only parts that show. These are changed daily, sometimes twice daily. While the shirt body continues to be worn, the collar and cuffs are white, starched stiff, and cleaned professionally. The shirt body, hidden under vest and coat, is worn for a week or more. It yellows with sweat, especially under the arms, but no one sees this. The outer appearance is pristine. The hidden reality is less so. Women's undergarments are truly spectacular in their filth. The corset has already been discussed. But let's revisit it with horror. A woman's corset is put on at age 13 or 14 and worn every day for the rest of her life. The same corset, potentially for years. It's never washed. It's pulled tight against skin every day, absorbing sweat, body oils, dead skin. It shapes itself to the body, the bones bending, the fabric stretching, the whole thing becoming a custom, fitted shell of compressed filth. Under the corset is a chemise, a simple cotton shift. This is the only layer that's regularly washed, weekly if the woman is fastidious. It's meant to protect the corset from the body, and the body from the corset. It does neither job well. By the end of a week, it's yellowed under the arms and smells like old sweat, and the metallic tang of fear, because corsets are uncomfortable, and breathing is hard, and fainting is common. Over the corset comes a corset cover, which is decorative and also never washed. Then petticoats, multiple layers, each adding warmth and shape. The inner petticoats are washed seasonally. The outer petticoats, maybe once a year. Then the cage crinoline, a framework of steel hoops that creates the enormous skirt shape. This is worn every day, and never washed because it's metal and fabric. It just accumulates dust and street dirt from brushing against everything. Finally, the dress itself. A nice dress is worn dozens of times before cleaning. Cleaning a Victorian dress is a major operation. It has to be partially disassembled, cleaned in sections with chemicals that might damage the fabric or dyes, then reassembled. Most women just spot, clean visible stains, and hope for the best. The dresses develop a smell over time, a combination of body odor, perfume, street dirt, and general staleness. This is masked with more perfume, creating a smell layered like geological strata. The result is that a well-dressed Victorian woman is carrying approximately 15 pounds of clothes, most of which haven't been washed in months or years. She's laced into a corset so tight that her organs are rearranged. She's wearing a chemise soaked with sweat. She's breathing through perfume, soaked handkerchiefs to mask the smell of herself and everyone around her. She's one of the lucky ones. You, still sweeping crossings at age 14, have none of these concerns. Your clothes are simple, practical, and filthy. You own 2 sets, one for work, one for Sunday. The Sunday set is less filthy. Both sets are washed twice a year, spring and fall. The washing happens at the communal wash house, where your mother joins a dozen other women to do a seasonal laundry. The wash house is hell, steaming hot, filled with lye fumes, loud with scrubbing and gossip. The women work all day boiling, scrubbing, wringing, hanging. They emerge exhausted, hands raw, clothes damp with steam and sweat. The clean laundry, such as it is, is carried home in baskets and put away with a sense of accomplishment that lasts, until the first wearing makes everything dirty again. Your body at 14 is a testament to Victorian hygiene practices. Your teeth are a disaster area. You've lost 4 more to decay, and 1 to an abscess that swelled your face for a week before bursting on its own. The relief was immediate. The smell was memorable. Your remaining teeth are brown and aching. You manage pain by chewing willow bark when you can get it, or just suffering when you can't. The local tooth puller is an option for extractions, but he charges 6p and works without anaesthetic. People scream. You've heard them. You've decided to keep your rotting teeth as long as possible. Your skin is a map of Victorian childhood. Scars from untreated infections, burns from cooking fires, cuts from work. Your hands are callosed and cracked. The skin around your fingernails split and bleeding. Your knees are permanently scraped and scarred from kneeling on cobblestones while sweeping. Your face has survived smallpox, leaving you pockmarked but alive. 50% of the children in your neighborhood didn't survive it. You're lucky. The scars are badges of honor. Your hair, now that you're older and it's longer, is a solid mass most of the time. It's washed perhaps 4 times a year, when the rest of you is washed. Between washings, it accumulates grease, dirt, lice, and occasionally things you don't identify. You try to comb it weekly with a wooden comb that's missing several teeth. The combing removes some lice and some loose hair, but mostly just redistributes the grease. Your hair stands up in interesting ways, having been trained by neglect into permanent disorder. You've started to notice girls, which is unfortunate, because girls your age notice boys who smell better than you do. The girls in your neighborhood aren't exactly fragrant themselves, but they make efforts. They wash their faces more regularly. They attempt to keep their hair neat. They change their aprons when possible. You, covered daily in horse manure and street filth, are not anyone's first choice. Still, you're working, earning money, and that counts for more than cleanliness in the marriage market of your class. There's a girl named Mary, a rag picker's daughter, who doesn't seem bothered by your smell. Probably because she spends her days sorting through refuse, picking out anything sellable. She smells like old garbage and damp cloth. Together, you're a powerful olfactory combination. You walk together sometimes after work, not touching because that would be forward, just walking close enough that your smells mingle into something new and terrible. You consider this courtship. So does she. Her mother approves because you have steady work. Your mother approves because Mary is strong and unlikely to die of consumption immediately. Consumption, tuberculosis, is everywhere. The White Plague. It takes people slowly, making them pale and thin and beautiful before killing them. It's considered almost romantic in a horrible way. Everyone knows someone who's died of it. Everyone knows someone who has it currently. The coughing is constant, a background noise to Victorian life. People cough into their hands, into handkerchiefs they tuck back into pockets, into the air. The concept of covering one's mouth exists, but isn't rigorously practiced. Germs are still theoretical. Tuberculosis is blamed on bad air, moral weakness, or heredity. Your brother, the one who shared your bed for years, develops a cough. Not the normal London cough, but a deep, wet, productive cough. He starts losing weight. Your mother makes him beef tea, boiling bones for hours to extract nutrients. It doesn't help. He coughs blood. The doctor is called, costs a week's wages, and confirms what everyone already knows. Consumption. He's moved to his own bed. Not for quarantine, because that's not understood, but for comfort. He dies over 3 months, slowly wasting. His last weeks are spent coughing up pieces of his lungs. The handkerchiefs are soaked with blood. Your mother burns them after, along with his bedding. The room where he died is not cleaned in any meaningful way. The floor is swept. The window is opened briefly to air things out. Then your younger brother moves into that bed, because space is limited and the dead don't need beds. No one disinfects anything, because disinfection as a concept isn't fully realized yet. Carbolic acid exists but is used sparingly and mostly in hospitals. Your home, like most homes, relies on ventilation and hope. The funeral is cheap but respectable. Your brother is buried in the same churchyard as his siblings, in a grave that will eventually hold other family members. Graves are reused after 7 years, when bodies have decomposed sufficiently. The churchyard is crowded, markers packed tight, the ground soft with centuries of burials. It smells sweet and rotten. No one lingers after the burial. There's work tomorrow. Life continues. You continue sweeping. Mary continues rag picking. Your sister continues serving in Kensington. Your father continues drinking. Your mother continues cooking, cleaning, and slowly dying of the exhaustion that Victorian life demands of working-class women. She's pregnant again, her 8th pregnancy. 3 children have survived. The odds are not in this one's favour. The pregnancy is handled the same as all her pregnancies. No real medical care, unless something goes catastrophically wrong. No prenatal vitamins, because vitamins haven't been discovered yet. No ultrasounds or monitoring. She just continues working, growing larger, moving slower, until labour begins. She's told to avoid bathing, avoid excitement, avoid basically anything that might open her pores to disease. She follows this advice and smells progressively worse as the pregnancy advances. By 9 months, she's ripe enough to make people step back. Labour happens at home, in the same bed where the baby was conceived and where your brother recently died. The midwife arrives, the same one who's delivered half the neighbourhood. Her hands are still unwashed. Her instruments, such as they are wiped clean but not sterilised. Sterilisation is a concept that exists in theory, but isn't widely practiced. She's lost more mothers and babies than she's saved, but she's cheaper than a doctor and more experienced than most. The labour is long. Your mother screams. Everyone in the house hears. Everyone in the neighbouring houses hears. This is normal. Labour is expected to be agonising. Pain relief is limited to laudanum if you can afford it, or alcohol if you can't, or nothing if you're poor. Your mother gets a measure of gin and bites a leather strap. The baby comes eventually, blue and still. The midwife tries to revive it, rubbing it roughly, blowing in its mouth. Nothing works. It's another one for the churchyard. Your mother recovers slowly. There are no antibiotics for the fever that develops. No IV fluids for the dehydration. No blood transfusions for the anemia. She just lies in the bloody bed, sweating and shaking, while her body fights an infection it might not win against. She's not allowed to bathe, even now, even covered in blood and sweat and birth fluids. Water would be dangerous, the midwife explains. Instead, she's sponged lightly with a damp cloth, and her sheets are changed once when they become too stiff with blood. She survives, which is not guaranteed. Childbirth kills women regularly. Everyone knows someone who's died this way. The graveyard is full of young women with markers saying, "died in childbed," and similar euphemisms. Your mother is lucky or stubborn or both. She's up and working again within 2 weeks, pale and weak but alive. The dead baby is buried quickly, cheaply. These small funerals are too common to be remarkable. You're 15 now, old enough to understand that life is dirty, short, and painful. You've stopped expecting cleanliness because cleanliness isn't possible. You've stopped expecting comfort because comfort is a luxury for the wealthy. You've accepted the itch of lice, the ache of rotting teeth, the smell of your own body, the dirt ground into your skin, so deep it's part of you. This is normal. This is everyone's life. The rich suffer differently, in cleaner rooms with better food, but they suffer the same diseases, the same dirt, the same inevitable decay. The city around you is reaching a crisis point with waste management. The cesspits are full. The Thames is dead, biologically dead, poisoned beyond recovery. Fish don't live in it anymore. Nothing lives in it anymore except the bacteria that's killing people. The Great Stink will happen soon, in 1858, when Parliament will be forced to acknowledge that London is drowning in its own waste. But that's future knowledge. Right now, everyone just lives in the filth and tries not to think about it. Your street has a permanent stream running down the center. It's not water. It's everything else. Waste from chamber pots, runoff from butcher shops, discharge from primitive drains, rain when it rains. The stream is grey-brown and sometimes steaming when it's fresh. It smells exactly like you'd expect. Children play near it because children play everywhere. They get sick, some die. The ones who survive develop immunities that will serve them well if they make it to adulthood. There's a water pump at the end of your street. One of the public pumps that's supposed to provide clean water. It draws from a pipe that's supposed to be separate from the sewage. Supposed to be. In practice, the pipes leak, the systems mix, and the water that emerges is contaminated with everything London has to offer. People know the water makes them sick. They just don't know why. They boil it for tea and hope for the best. Cholera hits your neighborhood in the summer. It's a brutal disease, killing in hours. People are fine in the morning and dead by evening. The symptoms are horrifying: violent diarrhea, vomiting, cramps, dehydration so severe that skin turns blue and eyes sink back into skulls. Victims lose liters of fluid. They become mummified while still alive. Then they die. The street fills with victims. Bodies are collected by cart. The medical establishment blames bad air. They're certain that miasma rising from the Thames is responsible. They're wrong. But they're confidently wrong, which is worse. A doctor named John Snow has a theory about contaminated water, about the pump being the source. He's mostly ignored. The pump handle is eventually removed, after most of the damage is done, and the outbreak ends. Everyone credits better air. Snow's water theory remains fringe. You survive cholera, probably because you're young and strong and lucky. Mary survives. Your parents survive. Your remaining siblings survive. Entire families on your street don't. The empty houses are rented immediately to new families who need cheap housing and are willing to ignore the recent deaths. Nothing is cleaned. Nothing is disinfected. The new families just move into houses where people died days ago and start their own lives. Maybe they'll be luckier. By 16, you're promoted from crossing sweeper to stable hand. The pay is better. The work is harder. The smell is worse, which you wouldn't have thought possible. You work in a commercial stable that houses 30 horses used for pulling carts and carriages. Your job is to muck stalls, feed horses, groom horses, and maintain tack. You work 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. Sunday you rest, meaning you sleep and maybe wash your face. The stable is a marvel of concentrated filth. 30 horses produce approximately 900 pounds of manure daily. This manure is piled in the corner of the stable yard until it's collected weekly. The pile steams and reeks and attracts flies in biblical proportions. You shovel manure all day. You breathe manure all day. You eat your lunch with manure under your fingernails. You sleep in the stable loft, above the horses, breathing ammonia fumes from urine-soaked straw. Your eyes water constantly. Your lungs ache. You develop a cough that never fully goes away. The horses themselves are not kept particularly clean. They're brushed daily to keep their coats healthy. But their hooves are often infected, their legs scarred from poorly healed injuries, their teeth rotting from poor feed. They work until they're lame or sick. Then they're sold to knackers who render them into glue and dog food. The turnover is constant. You learn not to name them. Your own hygiene, never good, becomes theoretical. You're covered in horse sweat, horse manure, stable dust, hay chaff. You reek of horses and ammonia. Your clothes are stiff with dried sweat and manure. You wash your hands and face occasionally at the stable pump, but it's futile. The dirt is in your skin. You've become the dirt. Mary, when you meet on Sundays, no longer seems to notice your smell. Either she's used to it or she's too polite to mention it. Probably the former. Sunday is bath day, theoretically. In practice, it's too much work for too little payoff. You might dunk your head in a bucket of cold water. You might change your shirt if you have a clean one. Mostly you just try to rest before the work week begins again. Your body aches constantly. Your back, your shoulders, your hands. You're 16 and feel 40. This is normal for your class. Physical labor destroys bodies quickly. The stable master is a hard man who drinks and beats horses, and occasionally beats stable hands who displease him. You learn to be invisible when he's in a mood. You learn to work quickly and competently, and keep your mouth shut. The other stable hands are similar to you: young, poor, dirty, desperate. You form a camaraderie based on shared misery. You share food, information, complaints whispered where the master can't hear. One of the stable hands develops blood poisoning from a cut that got infected. His hand swells, turns red, then black. The doctor, when finally called, amputates the hand with a saw and no anesthetic. The stable hand screams and passes out. He's given the rest of the day off to recover. Then he's expected back at work. He can't work one-handed. He's dismissed. You never see him again. His replacement starts the next day. The stable has a privy that's essentially a hole in the ground with a wooden seat over it. 20 men use this privy. It's never cleaned, just occasionally covered with lime when the smell becomes unbearable. The lime helps minimally. The privy is swarming with flies. Using it requires breathing through your mouth and trying not to look down. Most men just use the stable yard when they can, pissing in corners, contributing to the general ammonia haze. The stable's water comes from a trough that's filled from a pipe. The water is questionable. Horses drink from it. Men drink from it. You cup your hands and drink, then immediately use those same hands to handle horses, food, everything. You're constantly ingesting horse, adjacent particles. Your body has made peace with this, or you'd be constantly ill. You're ill anyway, just functioning through it. At 17, you're a fully developed Victorian man. You're 5'6", short by modern standards, normal for your time and class. You're skinny despite eating constantly, burning calories through labor and poor nutrition. Your muscles are wire, thin and iron, hard. Your hands are ruined, permanently scarred and calloused, the nails thick and yellow. Your teeth, the ones remaining, are brown stumps. Your breath is remarkable. Your body odor is legendary. You haven't bathed properly, meaning submerged in water, in 6 months. You've washed your face and hands with varying degrees of thoroughness. You've changed your shirt twice, wearing each until it could stand alone, then rotating to the other while the first aired out on a nail in the stable loft. Neither shirt has been washed in that time, just worn and aired and worn again. They're both the same shade of greyish-brown, regardless of original colour. They smell like the concentrated essence of 17-year-old stable hand, a smell that could be weaponized. Your trousers are held up with rope. The original buttons are long gone. The fabric is more hole than trouser, patched repeatedly with whatever fabric was available. The crotch and inner thighs are worn through completely, showing your small clothes underneath. The small clothes aren't in better shape. They're washed monthly, meaning dunked in cold water and wrung out. No soap. Soap costs money. They never get truly clean, just less dirty temporarily. Your boots are a miracle of repair. Original leather, patched with different leather, patched with cloth, patched with wire and hope. The soles are worn through. You've put cardboard inside to cover the holes. The cardboard disintegrates and has to be replaced weekly. When it rains, your feet are instantly soaked. You work all day in wet boots, which never fully dry. Your feet are permanently wrinkled and pale, like you've spent 17 years in a bath. You haven't. The wrinkles are from constant dampness, not cleanliness. You've developed trench foot, though that term won't be invented for another 50 years. Your feet ache constantly. The skin between your toes cracks and bleeds. You ignore it because there's no alternative. Stopping work means starvation. You bind your feet in rags inside the boots and hope for the best. Mary has agreed to marry you, which is either love or desperation, probably both. You're both 18 now, both working, both capable of renting a room together and calling it a home. The wedding is cheap and quick. You both wear your best clothes, meaning your least dirty clothes. Mary has a dress that's been worn by 3 previous brides in her family. It's been spot, cleaned but never washed. The armpits are yellow-brown. The hem is stiff with street dirt. She looks beautiful anyway. Or maybe you're just pleased to have someone agree to marry you despite everything. The ceremony is brief. The church is cold. The priest rushes through the words. You're not the only wedding today. You're not even the most interesting wedding today. Someone faints, but it's not in your ceremony, so it doesn't matter. You're married. You kiss Mary, tasting tea and tooth decay. She kisses you back, tasting the same. You're officially a family. The room you rent is one room, literally. A single room on the 3rd floor of a boarding house. 10 feet by 10 feet. It contains a bed, a chair, a small table, and a chamber pot. That's all. There's no kitchen. Cooking happens in the communal kitchen downstairs, or you buy food from street vendors. There's no running water. Water comes from the courtyard pump and has to be carried up 3 flights. There's no heat except what you generate yourselves or what rises from the rooms below. You move your possessions in, which takes 1 trip because you own almost nothing. 2 sets of clothes each, a blanket, a cooking pot, some spoons. This is everything you've accumulated in 18 years of life. Mary adds a few things from her family. Some cracked dishes, a wooden crate for storage, a religious print to hang on the wall. The room is furnished. The first night in your own room is strange. It's private, which is novel. You've never had privacy before. You've always shared space with parents, siblings, other workers. Now it's just you and Mary and the sounds from the other rooms, which are considerable. The walls are thin. You hear everything. Conversations, arguments, other sounds. Everyone hears everything. Privacy is visual only. The bed is used when you rent it. The mattress is lumpy. The straw inside compressed and old. The sheets are grey and stiff. You don't have replacement sheets. These are the sheets. You'll sleep in them until they disintegrate. Then you'll save money for new ones. The blanket is wool and probably home to multiple species. You share it because you only have one. In winter you'll need more, but winter is months away and not today's problem. Mary keeps house as best she can, which isn't very well because there's almost nothing to keep. She sweeps the floor daily, or tries to, but the broom is worn to a nub, and the floor is so old that dirt is part of its structure. She wipes surfaces with a rag, but the rag is dirty and just redistributes grime. She empties the chamber pot each morning, carrying it downstairs carefully, dumping it in the communal cesspit. She does this without complaint, because complaining doesn't empty chamber pots. She's gotten work at a match factory, making matches for 12 hours a day. The work is poisonous, literally. The matches use white phosphorus, which causes phossy jaw, a condition where the jawbone dies and has to be removed. The factory workers glow in the dark from phosphorus exposure. Their breath smells like garlic and death. Mary's been there 2 months. Her gums are starting to recede. She's worried but can't afford to be. The factory pays better than alternatives. She comes home each evening smelling like sulfur and phosphorus. A smell that mixes with your horse, and manure smell to create something uniquely terrible. You eat dinner together, usually bread and cheese or soup from the street vendor. You eat at the small table, sharing the single bowl because washing dishes requires water carried from downstairs, and you're both too tired. You eat, then sit in silence, too exhausted for conversation. Washing is an event that requires planning. Once a week, on Sunday, Mary heats water over the communal kitchen fire. She heats enough for a basin. You both wash from this basin, faces, hands, arms if there's enough water. The water turns dark immediately. You never get truly clean, just less dirty. Your clothes go another week unwashed. Mary's dress is crusty with sweat and factory chemicals. Your shirt has achieved sentience. Neither of you mentions it. Bathing, actual submerged bathing, happens twice a year at the public baths. The public baths are cheap but not free. You save money for months for 2 bath tickets. When the day comes, you each take your turn in the same tub of water that's been used by a dozen people before you. The water is lukewarm and grey. It smells like wet dog, and everyone who's bathed in it. You sit in it for the allotted 15 minutes, soap yourself with the harsh public soap, and emerge feeling strange. Your skin feels exposed, vulnerable. The dirt was armor. Without it, you're just skin and bones and vulnerability. Mary bathes after you, in your water, which is now even greyer. She emerges pink and raw. Her hair, washed for the first time in months, hangs in clean strands that she hardly recognizes. She cries a little, though she won't say why. Maybe it's relief. Maybe it's the rarity of feeling clean. Maybe it's the knowledge that this cleanliness is temporary, and in a week she'll be back to her normal state of filth. You walk home slowly, trying to preserve the feeling. Within an hour, you're working at the stable and covered in horse again. Mary returns to the match factory and its chemical fog. By evening, you're both back to normal. The bath a brief intermission in your regularly scheduled dirt. Mary gets pregnant, which is inevitable given the lack of birth control beyond hope and timing. Condoms exist but are expensive, made from animal intestines, and considered somewhat scandalous. The rhythm method is unreliable and requires a regular cycle, which Mary doesn't have thanks to malnutrition and factory chemicals. So pregnancy happens, and with it comes the realization that your one-room home is about to become more crowded. The pregnancy is handled like your mother's pregnancies. Minimal intervention, maximum hope. Mary keeps working at the match factory until she's too large to comfortably stand at the work table. She's fired immediately with no compensation. Pregnant workers are liabilities. She comes home and cries, not just because of the lost wages, but because she's terrified of childbirth and what comes after. You're the sole income now. You beg for extra hours at the stable. The stable master gives you additional work mucking out the manure pile for an extra shilling a week. You work 16-hour days, coming home too exhausted to eat. Mary does her best with the reduced budget. Bread, potatoes, occasionally an onion. Meat becomes a memory. You're both losing weight while she's pregnant, which is not ideal, but is common. She stops washing beyond the minimum. Water has to be carried up 3 flights. She's too tired, too pregnant, too depressed. She sits in the room all day, no longer able to pick up rag work or other piecework, because her hands shake from phosphorus poisoning and pregnancy exhaustion. She smells increasingly ripe. You say nothing because what would you say? You're not exactly fresh either. You're both just decaying together, slowly, in your 10 by 10 room. The day comes. Labor starts in the middle of the night. You run for the midwife, the cheap one that everyone uses. She arrives drunk but functional. She's delivered hundreds of babies. Most survive. She rolls up her sleeves, revealing arms that haven't been washed in recent memory, and gets to work. Her hands go inside your wife without washing, without anything. This is normal. This is how it's done. Mary screams. The whole boarding house hears. No one does anything because this is normal. Women scream. Babies come or don't. Life continues. You stand in the corner, useless and terrified. The midwife barks orders: boil water. Get rags. Stay out of the way. You do what you're told, grateful to be useful even minimally. The baby comes after 8 hours. It's a boy. He's alive. He's small and red and screaming. The midwife cuts the cord with a knife from her bag, a knife that's crusted with the blood of previous births. She ties off the cord with string. She hands you the baby while she delivers the afterbirth. You hold your son, this tiny creature covered in blood and vernix and other fluids. He smells like birth, like meat and blood and something else. He's beautiful. He's horrifying. He's yours. The midwife leaves after an hour, taking her fee, leaving instructions. Keep the mother warm. Don't let her bathe for 6 weeks. Feed the baby. That's it. That's all the postnatal care. Mary lies in bed, exhausted and bleeding. The sheets are soaked. You don't have other sheets. She'll lie in bloody sheets until they dry, and then continue lying in them. You put the baby next to her. He roots around and finds a breast and starts nursing. This part, at least, is instinctive. The room now smells like blood and birth fluids in addition to everything else. You open the window briefly to air it out. But it's winter and the cold rushes in. Mary protests weakly. You close the window. The smell stays. It will stay for weeks, mixing with the existing smells to create a new, more complex odor palette. You name the baby Thomas, after your dead brother. This is practical. The name's already been used. It's bad luck to waste names. Thomas doesn't care. He's alternately nursing, screaming, or sleeping. He's never quiet. The other boarders complain. The landlord threatens to evict you if the baby doesn't shut up. You try to keep Thomas quiet, but babies don't understand threats. He screams when he wants to scream. Mary is not recovering well. She has fever. The bleeding hasn't stopped. She's pale and weak and not eating. You bring her bread softened in water. She can't keep it down. The midwife returns for another fee, examines Mary with her still unwashed hands, and declares it's childbed fever. Many women get it. Most recover. Some don't. She recommends prayer and patience. You pray. You have no patience, but you wait anyway, because what else can you do? Mary lies in the bloody bed with the baby, both of them smelling like sickness and milk. You go to work because not going means everyone starves. You come home to find Mary worse. The fever is higher. She's delirious. She doesn't recognize you. She thinks you're her father. She thinks the baby is a cat. She needs a doctor. The doctor costs a week's wages, but you pay it. He arrives with his black bag and his professional air. He examines Mary, touching her with hands that might have been washed this morning, might not have been. He declares it a severe case of puerperal fever. The prognosis is poor. He can bleed her, which might help. Bleeding costs extra. You pay. He opens a vein and drains what looks like far too much blood into a bowl. Mary barely reacts. He leaves instructions that are useless and takes his fee and goes. Mary dies 3 days later. She's 20 years old. You're left with a week-old baby and no idea what to do. The landlord wants her body removed immediately. It's attracting flies and smells worse than usual. You borrow a cart. Mary's family comes. They take her body for burial. The funeral is the cheapest possible. She's buried in a common grave with 3 other paupers who died that week. There's no marker. She's just gone. You're left with Thomas, who doesn't understand that his mother is dead and just wants to eat. You have no ability to feed him. Mary was nursing. There's no formula. Wet nurses exist but cost money you don't have. You try to feed him cow's milk diluted with water, using a rag dipped in the mixture. He sucks the rag and sometimes gets milk. Mostly he screams. He's starving. You're helpless. You take Thomas to Mary's mother. She's already raising 3 grandchildren from another daughter who died similarly. She looks at Thomas, looks at you, and sighs. She takes him. She has nothing to give him either, but she'll try. You pay what you can, a few shillings a week. It's money you don't have, but you find it somehow, skipping meals, working extra hours. Your room is empty now, just you. The bed still has Mary's blood on it. You can't afford new sheets. You sleep in that blood for months until it's faded to brown ghosts. You smell it sometimes, or think you do. The room smells like death and old blood and sadness. You stop caring. You work, eat, sleep, repeat. This is life now. You don't wash anymore beyond the minimum for work. What's the point? You're alone in a room with no one to care. Your clothes deteriorate further. Your body accumulates layers of dirt like tree rings, marking time. You develop a beard because shaving requires effort and water and caring. The beard is patchy and filthy. Things live in it. You don't investigate. By 20 you're old. Not in years but in exhaustion. You've buried a wife, lost a son to someone else's care, worked yourself into a permanent stoop. Your hands are clawed from gripping stable tools. Your back aches constantly. You cough blood sometimes. The doctor, when you finally see one, says you have the consumption. Your brother's disease. It's coming for you too. You continue working until you can't. The consumption takes you slowly, wasting you away. You're too sick to work. You're evicted for not paying rent. You end up in the workhouse, that final destination for the Victorian poor. The workhouse is clean, relatively. You're forced to bathe upon entry. Stripped, scrubbed with harsh soap, given workhouse clothes that are clean but rough. It's the cleanest you've been in years, and you hate it. You've lived so long with dirt that cleanliness feels like losing a layer of skin. The workhouse feeds you thin gruel, houses you in a ward with 40 other men, makes you work if you're able, which you're not. You lie in a narrow bed and cough and slowly die. This takes months. No one visits. Mary's family has forgotten you. Thomas doesn't know you. You're alone in a room full of dying people, which is somehow worse than being alone. You die on a Tuesday in March. You're 22 years old. Your body is buried in the pauper's field, unmarked, unmissed. The workhouse strips the bed, boils the sheets, and gives your space to the next dying man. Within a day, it's like you never existed. This is Victorian hygiene. This is Victorian life for the working poor. Dirt, disease, death, all mixed together in a thick soup of human suffering. The rich lived longer and cleaner, but not much. Everyone was dirty. Everyone was sick. Everyone died younger than they should have. This was normal. This was accepted. This was life in the world's most powerful empire at the height of its power. The water you drank was poisoned. The air you breathed was toxic. The clothes you wore were crawling with parasites. Your teeth rotted in your mouth. Your body accumulated years of grime that no amount of washing could fully remove. You lived, worked, and died in filth, and everyone around you did the same. This was the Victorian era, where industry was booming, culture was flourishing, and basic hygiene was a distant dream that no one even knew they should be having. You were born into dirt, and you died in dirt, and the dirt was always there, always waiting, always winning. The Victorians built railways and factories and empires, but they couldn't build a way to stay clean. They conquered nations but couldn't conquer the bacteria in their own drinking water. They created the modern world while living in conditions that would make medieval peasants recoil. But let's step back. Let's examine this more systematically, because your life, miserable as it was just one example. The horror of Victorian hygiene was universal, touching every class, every occupation, every corner of society. The details varied, but the fundamental grimness remained constant. Consider the hospitals, places theoretically dedicated to healing. Victorian hospitals were charnel houses, dressed in respectability. The wards were crowded, beds packed so close together that diseases jumped from patient to patient like eager children playing tag. The windows were kept closed because of miasma theory. The air was thick with the smell of gangrene, suppuration, death. Surgeons operated in their street clothes, coats stiff with the blood of previous patients. They didn't wash their hands between patients. Why would they? Germs weren't real to them. The surgeons wore the same coats for years, the blood and pus accumulating in layers. A surgeon's bloody coat was a badge of honor, proof of experience. The bloodier the coat, the more operations performed, the more respect earned. They would operate on one patient, wipe their hands on the bloody coat, and move to the next patient. The concept of cross-contamination didn't exist. The concept of infection as something preventable didn't exist. People died, and doctors shrugged and blamed weak constitutions. Operating theatres were exactly that, theatres. Students and interested parties would crowd around to watch, breathing on the open wound, sometimes leaning in close for a better view. The patient, if conscious, could see the audience watching their agony. Anesthesia existed in the later Victorian period, but wasn't universally used. Many doctors considered pain beneficial, character building, possibly necessary for proper healing, so patients were held down by strong men while surgeons cut into conscious flesh. The screaming was expected. The survival rate was approximately 50% for major operations. The surgical instruments were wiped clean between patients, not sterilized. Sterilization as a concept was introduced by Joseph Lister in the 1860s with his carbolic acid spray, but it was resisted fiercely by the medical establishment. Doctors found it insulting, the implication that their hands or instruments could be dirty. They were professionals. Professionals weren't dirty. So they continued operating with instruments that carried infection from patient to patient, and they continued wondering why so many patients developed sepsis and died. Hospital beds were changed when patients died or when the sheets became too stiff with fluids to be functional. A patient might lie in the same sheets for weeks, sweating through fevers, bleeding through wounds, voiding themselves when too weak to use the bedpan. The sheets would be crusty with dried fluids, the mattress beneath soaked with years of patient discharge. These beds were death beds in the most literal sense. Lying in one meant a significant chance of not getting up again. The bedpans were emptied by nurses who then moved on to other tasks without washing their hands. They would empty a bedpan, then serve food, then change a dressing, then empty another bedpan. Their aprons were stiff with dried fluids. Their hands were vectors for every disease in the ward. They didn't know. They were doing their best with the understanding they had. Their best was killing people. Nurses in Victorian hospitals were often untrained women from the lower classes, unable to get other work. This changed gradually with Florence Nightingale's reforms, but for much of the era, nursing was considered fit only for women who couldn't do anything else. They were frequently drunk, often cruel, always overworked. They were paid little and expected to work 18-hour shifts in conditions that would break anyone. Some were genuinely caring. Most were just surviving. The hospital diet was gruel, bread, weak tea. Sometimes there was meat for patients who could afford to pay extra. The food was prepared in kitchens that were breeding grounds for bacteria. The meat was often spoiled before cooking. The bread was occasionally adulterated with chalk or alum to make it whiter. The tea was mostly hot water with a hint of tea leaves that had been used multiple times. Patients who were supposed to be recovering were being fed starvation rations while lying in beds that were actively poisoning them. Mortality rates in hospitals were so high that many people refused to go, preferring to die at home. Hospital fever, now known to be a combination of various infections spread by poor hygiene, killed patients who had survived their initial injuries or illnesses. A broken leg could be fatal, not from the break, but from the infection that developed afterward. A successful surgery could be a death sentence if infection set in, which it usually did. The maternity wards were particularly deadly. Puerperal fever, childbed fever killed new mothers at astonishing rates. Entire maternity wards would be wiped out by infection spreading from patient to patient via doctors' hands. A doctor would perform an autopsy on a woman who died of puerperal fever, then go directly to the maternity ward to deliver babies, carrying death on his hands. The infection rate in some hospitals reached 80%. Most of those women died. Ignaz Semmelweis figured out that washing with chlorinated lime solution prevented puerperal fever. He reduced mortality rates in his ward from 18% to less than 2%. The medical establishment rejected his findings, ridiculed him, drove him to a mental breakdown and death. Hand washing seemed absurd to them. Their hands were clean. They were gentlemen. Gentlemen's hands were clean by definition. The fact that these clean hands were killing women was just bad luck, weak constitutions, God's will. Outside hospitals, in private practice, doctors were marginally better, but not much. They made house calls carrying their black bags, filled with instruments that hadn't been cleaned properly. They would examine one patient, collecting whatever bacteria or virus they had, then carry it to the next patient. They were mobile disease vectors, dressed in professional black, spreading illness under the guise of healing. The doctors themselves rarely washed. Their medical coats were worn day after day. Their hands were washed occasionally, when they remembered, with plain water and sometimes soap. The concept of washing between patients wasn't standard practice. Why would it be? They were moving from one respectable home to another. Respectable homes were clean, theoretically. Respectable people didn't have germs. Except they did. Everyone did. Germs are remarkably egalitarian. Dental care deserves its own horror chapter. Victorian teeth were universally terrible. The combination of a sugar-heavy diet, no fluoride, no proper brushing, and no preventive care meant that mouths were disaster zones. Children lost teeth to decay by age 10. Adults were frequently toothless by 30. The pain was constant and accepted as normal. Toothaches were just part of life, like rain or cold. When pain became unbearable, you went to a tooth puller, not a dentist, because dentistry as a profession barely existed. A tooth puller, often a barber or a random person who'd decided they could pull teeth. They used pliers. Sometimes they got the right tooth. Sometimes they broke the tooth and had to dig out the fragments. There was no anesthetic. You sat in a chair, probably in the street or a market, and someone pulled your tooth while you screamed and people watched. This was entertainment. People would gather to watch tooth pulling the way others watched street performers. The instruments were never sterilized, barely cleaned. The tooth puller would work on multiple patients in a row with the same pliers, spreading infection from mouth to mouth. The pulled tooth was often the least of your problems. The infection that followed could kill you. Dental abscesses could spread to the brain or heart. Many people died from bad teeth, essentially. A tooth could be a death sentence. The wealthy could afford actual dentists, who were marginally better. They had offices instead of street corners. They had slightly better instruments. They might use some form of pain relief, like cocaine or laughing gas in the later Victorian period. But they still didn't understand infection. They still used the same instruments on multiple patients. They still caused problems, as often as they solved them. False teeth were made from various materials, none of them good. Porcelain teeth that broke easily. Metal teeth that rusted. Sometimes, teeth from dead people. Grave robbers would harvest teeth from corpses and sell them to dentists, who would file them down and install them in wealthy patients' mouths. These were called Waterloo teeth, supposedly from young soldiers killed in battle who had good teeth. They were popular. They were also riddled with disease. You could contract syphilis or tuberculosis from dead people's teeth installed in your mouth. This happened frequently. Hair care was another nightmare. Victorian hairstyles, particularly for women, were elaborate and time-consuming. Hair was washed rarely because the process was difficult and drying was slow. Women might wash their hair monthly or less. Between washings, they used various powders and oils to make the hair manageable. These products were often toxic, lead-based powders, mercury-containing oils, arsenic solutions to promote growth. The hair itself became a repository for whatever was in the environment. Coal dust, street dirt, cooking smoke, all settled into elaborate hairstyles that were meant to last a week or more. Women would sleep carefully to preserve their hairstyles, using special pillows or sleeping sitting up. The hair would be pinned and pomaded and held in place with combs and pins. After a week, taking down a hairstyle released a small cloud of accumulated filth and a smell that required immediate washing, which then started the whole cycle again. Men's hair was slightly easier but no cleaner. Hair was pomaded with various greases. Macassar oil was popular, made from coconut oil and various additives. It made hair shiny and kept it in place. It also made it greasy and attracted dirt. Men would oil their hair daily, adding more oil to yesterday's oil, never washing, just adding layers. The result was hair that was simultaneously stiff and greasy, shiny and filthy. The oil would transfer to everything. Chairs, pillows, clothes. Antimacassars, small doilies placed on chair backs, were invented specifically to protect furniture from men's oiled hair. These doilies would accumulate oil and dirt and were washed occasionally, but they were fighting a losing battle against the constant onslaught of pomaded heads. Lice were universal. Everyone had them. Rich and poor. Young and old, clean and dirty. Though let's be honest, no one was clean. Lice didn't discriminate. They lived in hair, fed on blood, laid eggs called nits that were nearly impossible to remove. Mothers would spend hours picking through children's hair, crushing lice between their thumbnails. This was bonding time. This was normal family activity. Finding lice was as routine as finding hair. The treatments for lice were often worse than the lice. Kerosene poured on the head, which occasionally caught fire. Mercury compounds that poisoned slowly. Various herbal concoctions that did nothing. The most effective treatment was to cut off all the hair, which women couldn't do because long hair was essential to respectability. So they lived with lice, managed them as best they could, and accepted them as a normal part of existence. Bedbugs were similarly universal. Every bed had them. They lived in mattresses, bed frames, walls, anywhere near sleeping humans. They came out at night to feed, biting and sucking blood. People woke up covered in bites. Children cried from the itching. Adults just endured. Bedbugs were facts of life. You couldn't eliminate them completely. You could only manage them, keep their numbers down through various methods. The standard method was to take apart the bed periodically and pour boiling water over everything. This killed the bugs you could reach, but never all of them. They'd hide in cracks, in walls, in places the boiling water couldn't reach. Within weeks, they'd be back. It was an endless cycle. Some people put the bed legs in dishes of water, creating moats the bedbugs supposedly couldn't cross. The bedbugs learned to climb the walls and drop from the ceiling. They were adaptable. Fleas were everywhere there were people and animals, which was everywhere. Dogs had fleas, cats had fleas, rats had fleas, and the rats were everywhere. The fleas jumped from animal to human happily. They weren't picky. They bit, they bred, they spread disease. The Black Death had been spread by fleas, though the Victorians didn't know that. They just knew fleas were annoying and unavoidable. People wore flea traps. Small containers of honey or sticky substance hung around the neck. The theory was that fleas would be attracted to the trap and get stuck. The reality was that you'd catch a few fleas while hundreds more continued biting. Still, people persisted with flea traps because doing something felt better than doing nothing, even when the something was ineffective. Scratching was constant. Everyone scratched. Lice bites on the scalp, bedbug bites on the body, flea bites on the ankles. The scratching broke the skin, which got infected. Infections were treated with poultices, usually made from bread and milk, which mostly just got moldy and had to be removed. Some infections healed, others festered and spread. People died from infected bug bites. It sounds absurd, but it happened regularly. The clothing industry was built on filth and suffering. Fabric production, whether cotton or wool, was done in factories that were nightmares of exploitation and toxic conditions. Workers, often children, worked 14-hour days in unventilated rooms filled with fiber dust and machine oil fumes. They breathed fabric particles constantly, their lungs filled with fibers. They developed brown lung or other respiratory diseases and died young. The workers themselves were filthy because washing required time and water they didn't have. They went to work, came home exhausted, ate, slept, repeated. Bathing was a luxury they couldn't afford in time or energy. They wore their work clothes daily, accumulating layers of factory filth. Their hands were stained with dye or oil. Their hair was white with fiber dust. They coughed constantly, bringing up grey phlegm. The fabric produced in these conditions was sold to make clothes that were worn by everyone. The cloth itself started dirty, containing residues from the production process. It was sewn into garments by seamstresses who worked in similar conditions. Crowded sweatshops or isolated home work. The seamstresses earned pennies per garment, working by candlelight until their eyes failed, their backs bent permanently from hunching over work. The finished garments were sold and worn, and rarely washed. A dress might be worn 100 times before cleaning. A coat might go years. The garments absorbed everything's sweat, dirt, smoke, street filth, body oils, perfume trying to mask all of it. They became crusted and stiff and discolored. They smelled like compressed time. Every wearing contributing to the accumulated odor. Laundry, when it happened, was brutal work. Commercial laundries employed women who worked in steaming buildings, standing at tubs of boiling water for 12 hours daily. Their hands were permanently red, and raw from the combination of heat and harsh lye soap. Their faces were flushed from constant steam exposure. They breathed air saturated with moisture and soap fumes. They developed respiratory problems and skin conditions. They aged rapidly. The laundry process itself was violent. Clothes were boiled, beaten, scrubbed, wrung through mangles that could take off a finger if you weren't careful. Women lost fingers regularly. The mangles were dangerous, the boiling water scalded, the lye burned skin and eyes. It was dangerous work for minimal pay. But it was considered women's work, therefore not worthy of better pay or conditions. The clothes that came back from laundry were clean, sort of. The visible dirt was gone. The invisible dirt, the bacteria, the parasites, they persisted. The water used for laundry was drawn from the same contaminated sources as drinking water. You were essentially washing clothes in dirty water, then wringing them out and calling them clean. They looked better. They smelled better temporarily. But they weren't truly clean by any modern standard. Ironing was done with heavy flat irons heated on stoves. The irons weighed several pounds and had to be hot enough to smooth fabric, but not so hot they scorched. This required judgment and experience. Women would test the iron temperature by spitting on it, watching how quickly the spit evaporated. Close enough, they'd start ironing. Burns were common. Scorched garments were common. But ironed clothes looked crisp and proper, which was important even if they were dirty. Let's talk about cosmetics, because Victorian beauty standards required paint and powder, and Victorian cosmetics were poison. Women wanted pale skin, rosy cheeks, bright eyes, red lips. They achieved this with lead and arsenic and mercury. These were the main ingredients in Victorian cosmetics. They were slow, acting poisons that accumulated in the body over years, causing organ damage, neurological problems, and death. Lead-based face powder was standard. It created a fashionable pale complexion by poisoning the user. The lead would be absorbed through the skin, causing lead poisoning anemia, brain damage, kidney failure. Women using these powders would develop tremors, confusion, seizures. Doctors would treat the symptoms without realizing the cause was the powder they applied daily. Well, some doctors realized. They published warnings. Women ignored them because fashion demanded paleness. Belladonna drops were used to dilate pupils, making eyes appear larger and more luminous. Belladonna is deadly nightshade, a poison. The drops worked by paralyzing the eye muscles. This was considered beautiful. The side effects included blurred vision, sensitivity to light, and with extended use, blindness. Women went blind from beauty. Some women died from accidentally using too much belladonna. Fashion killed. Arsenic wafers were eaten to improve complexion. Small doses of arsenic were supposed to make skin glow. They did, in a way, by slightly poisoning the person, which increased blood flow to the skin. Prolonged use caused arsenic poisoning, skin lesions, nerve damage, organ failure, death. Women knew this. They did it anyway. Beauty standards demanded it, and women complied even when compliance was literally fatal. Mercury-based cosmetics were used for various purposes: skin lightening, blemish removal, hair growth. Mercury is neurotoxic. It causes tremors, mood swings, cognitive decline. The symptoms that were collectively called Mad Hatter disease in hatters who used mercury in felt production. Women using mercury cosmetics developed the same symptoms. They became irritable, depressed, anxious. Their hands shook. Their memories failed. They attributed it to hysteria or weak female constitutions, not to the mercury they were rubbing on their faces daily. Rouge for cheeks was made from various substances, some relatively harmless like beet juice, others toxic like vermilion, which contained mercury. Lipstick was made from carmine, crushed beetles, which was fine, or from toxic dyes that weren't fine. The lipstick would be applied, eaten throughout the day with food and drink, reapplied. Women were ingesting their cosmetics constantly, poisoning themselves in small doses that accumulated over time. Men weren't exempt from cosmetic poisoning, though they used fewer products. Hair dyes for beards were popular. These often contained lead or silver nitrate. The dyes would stain skin, be absorbed, cause poisoning. Men's mustache wax was made with various waxes and oils, some containing toxic substances. It would be inhaled, ingested, absorbed, slowly poisoning. The wealthy could afford better cosmetics, but better didn't mean safe. It just meant more expensive poisons. The poor used home-made cosmetics that were often worse. Soot for eye makeup, brick dust for rouge, urine for hair lightening, the ammonia acting as a bleach. These home remedies were sometimes less toxic than commercial products, sometimes more so. Either way, everyone was painting themselves with various substances, most of which were bad for them. Perfume deserves extended discussion. In an era where bathing was rare and everyone stank, perfume was essential. The wealthy doused themselves in heavy floral scents: rose, jasmine, lavender, musk. These perfumes were intense, designed to overwhelm rather than complement natural scent. They were necessary because the natural scent was horrific. A ballroom full of perfumed Victorians still smelled awful, just awful in a different way. The perfumes themselves were often made with toxic substances. Musk came from glands of various animals, harvested in ways that were cruel and unsanitary. Ambergris came from whale intestines, literally whale vomit, which was valuable and used in high-end perfumes. Civet came from the anal glands of civet cats. These substances were mixed with alcohol and various oils to create scents that were considered sophisticated. People applied perfume liberally, soaking handkerchiefs, dousing clothes, splashing it on skin. The perfume bottles were works of art, ornate crystal or glass, but the contents were often toxic. Some perfumes contained lead acetate for sweetness. Others contained turpentine or other solvents. The inhalation of these fumes, day after day, year after year, contributed to the general toxicity of Victorian life. Pomanders, balls of aromatic substances, were carried to ward off disease. The theory was that disease spread through bad smells, so good smells would prevent disease. This was wrong, but it made people feel better. Pomanders were made from spices, herbs, and often ambergris. They were held to the nose when passing through particularly smelly areas, like open sewers or meat markets. They did nothing to prevent disease, but they made the immediate smell marginally better. Smelling salts were used to revive women who fainted, which happened frequently. Women fainted from corsets restricting breathing, from malnutrition, from being in overheated rooms in heavy clothes, from general poor health. The smelling salts were typically ammonia-based, harsh and sharp. They'd be waved under the nose of the fainting woman, who'd gasp and revive, then be expected to continue with whatever she was doing. The underlying causes of the fainting were never addressed. The home environment was toxic in ways beyond just dirt. The wallpaper, as mentioned earlier, was often coloured with arsenic. Shields green and Paris green were popular shades, both arsenic-based. These wallpapers were beautiful, fashionable, and deadly. When the wallpaper got damp from poor ventilation and condensation, it released arsenic gas. Families were slowly poisoned in their own homes. Children died. Adults sickened. Doctors were baffled. Eventually, the connection was made between arsenic wallpaper and illness, but the wallpaper remained popular for years after. Fashion outweighed safety. People would rather have stylish wallpaper than live. Or they didn't believe the warnings, or they couldn't afford to replace expensive wallpaper. So the poisoning continued. Paint was lead-based. Toys were painted with lead paint. Children's cribs were painted with lead paint. Children chewed on their cribs and ingested lead. They developed lead poisoning, which caused developmental delays, behavioral problems, seizures. Parents didn't connect the dots. How could they? Doctors didn't know. Lead poisoning wasn't understood. Children just failed to thrive, had fits, died young. This was considered normal childhood mortality. Furniture was often covered in fabrics dyed with toxic substances. Aniline dyes, newly developed from coal tar derivatives, were popular and poisonous. The dyes would rub off on skin and clothes. People were absorbing these chemicals constantly. The long-term effects weren't known, because long-term health tracking didn't exist. People just got sick. stayed sick, died early. This was life. Carpets and curtains accumulated dust, smoke, and particulates from coal fires. These were beaten occasionally to remove visible dirt, but never truly cleaned. They harbored mold, dust mites, and various allergens. Asthma and respiratory problems were endemic, blamed on weak constitutions rather than environmental factors. People lived in homes that were actively making them sick. Gas lighting was common in better homes. It produced carbon monoxide, which caused chronic poisoning, headaches, fatigue, confusion. Families would sit in gas-lit rooms all evening, breathing poisonous fumes, then wonder why everyone felt tired and ill. The gas also produced soot that covered everything, adding to the general filth. Electric lighting was introduced late in the Victorian era and was cleaner but less common. Heating came from coal fires. Coal smoke filled homes, blackening walls and ceilings, coating everything in soot. The smoke was breathed constantly. Lung disease was universal. The infamous London fog was actually smog, a combination of fog and coal smoke, so thick it could kill. The Great Smog of 1952 would kill 4,000 people in London, but Victorian smogs were nearly as bad, killing hundreds regularly. People just accepted it as the cost of staying warm. Food safety was a concept that barely existed. There was no refrigeration, no health inspections, no sell-by dates. Food was sold until it was gone, whether it was fresh or not. Milk was watered down and often contaminated with bacteria that caused tuberculosis. Meat was sold even when visibly spoiled, the rotten parts cut off, the rest sold as fresh. Bread was adulterated with chalk, alum, and occasionally worse things to increase weight and whiteness. Street food was everywhere and universally suspicious. Meat pies from vendors who knows what was in them. Hot eels kept warm in suspicious liquids. Oysters from polluted waters, eaten raw. Pea soup that might contain actual peas, or might be coloured dishwater. People ate this food because it was cheap and accessible. They got sick regularly: food poisoning, dysentery, cholera. They recovered or didn't, then ate more street food because there were no alternatives. Butcher shops were nightmare fuel. Meat hung in open air, exposed to flies and dirt. Blood ran in the streets. Intestines were discarded in piles. The smell was overwhelming. Butchers worked in aprons that were never washed, just wiped off occasionally. Their hands were covered in animal blood and fat. They would handle money, then meat, then money again. Cross-contamination was constant and unavoidable. Fish markets were worse. Fish rotted quickly without refrigeration. The smell was biblical. Fish were kept on ice if the fishmonger was prosperous, otherwise just piled in the open air. Flies swarmed. The fish went from fresh to questionable to definitely bad, and were sold at each stage, just at different prices. People bought what they could afford, knowing the cheap fish might make them sick, but eating it anyway, because starvation was worse than food poisoning. Grocery stores, such as they were small shops with bulk goods in barrels and bins. The goods were exposed to air, mice, insects, whatever wandered in. Flour had weevils. Sugar had ants. Rice had various insects. This was normal. You just sifted out the insects and used the food. Wasting food because of a few bugs was impossible when food was expensive and money was scarce. Milk wasn't pasteurized. Pasteurization was developed by Louis Pasteur, but wasn't widely adopted for decades. Raw milk from cows that might have tuberculosis was sold daily by milkmen who carried it in metal containers through streets, where it was exposed to everything. The milk was often watered down to increase volume. Sometimes the water used was contaminated. Babies fed this milk died regularly of tuberculosis and other milk-borne diseases. Water, we've covered, but it bears repeating because water was the source of so much death. The Thames was an open sewer. The water pumps drew from wells that were contaminated by cesspits. People were essentially drinking diluted sewage and wondering why they got cholera. The connection seems obvious now, but was fiercely resisted then. The miasma theory was too entrenched. Bad smells caused disease. Everyone knew. Bad water was just unpleasant, not dangerous. When cholera hit, as it did repeatedly, the death toll was staggering. Tens of thousands died in London alone. Entire neighbourhoods were decimated. Families were wiped out. Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. And still the authorities insisted it was bad air, not bad water. John Snow proved the connection in 1854 by mapping cholera cases and showing they clustered around a contaminated pump. He was ignored, mostly. The pump handle was removed, eventually, reluctantly. The outbreak ended. The medical establishment continued believing in miasma for another 20 years. The Thames itself was so polluted that nothing lived in it. It was black and foul, and occasionally caught fire from the methane produced by decomposing organic matter. Parliament couldn't meet in summer because the smell was unbearable. This was called the Great Stink of 1858. It finally forced action. Joseph Bazalgette was commissioned to build a sewer system. He did, an engineering marvel that's still partly in use. It solved some problems and created others, mainly by moving London's sewage downstream rather than treating it. But at least Parliament could meet in summer. Public toilets, when they existed, were horror shows. Dark, filthy holes in the ground with no privacy, no hygiene, no humanity. They were avoided when possible. Most people just used alleys, corners, anywhere convenient. Public urination was normal for men. Shameful but sometimes necessary for women. Chamber pots were emptied into gutters. The streets ran with human waste. This was every day. This was every street. The smell was inescapable. The wealthy had water closets, early toilets that flushed. These were marvels of technology and slightly less filthy than alternatives. They still emptied into cesspits in the basement or backyard, which had to be pumped out regularly. The cesspits often leaked, contaminating wells, spreading disease. But at least the waste wasn't immediately visible, which was considered an improvement. Indoor plumbing, when it existed, was lead pipes. Lead poisoning from plumbing was common but not understood. People drank water that had sat in lead pipes overnight, absorbing lead. They developed the symptoms of chronic lead poisoning: fatigue, abdominal pain, mood changes, cognitive decline. This was attributed to various causes, never to the pipes carrying their water. Bathtubs existed in wealthy homes, though again used infrequently. When used, the water had to be heated and carried by servants, bucket by bucket. After the family bathed, in order of importance, the water was often used by servants or given to the poor as an act of charity. Imagine being so poor that your bath is the water a wealthy family has already bathed in. This happened. The poor accepted gratefully because even fifth-hand bath water was better than no water at all. Public bathhouses existed and were slightly better than nothing. You could pay a few pence for access to a bath. The water was reused throughout the day, growing progressively darker and more populated with the filth of previous bathers. By evening, you were essentially bathing in soup made from dozens of people's dirt. But it was warm, and warmth was valuable, and most people were too tired to care about water quality. They just sat in the murk and tried to relax for their allotted time. Swimming pools, when they existed, were filled with unfiltered, unchlorinated water. Everyone swam in the same water for days or weeks until it was drained and refilled. The water was opaque with suspended particles of human origin. People swam in it anyway, because swimming was considered healthy. They emerged smelling like a combination of every person who'd swum before them. Infections spread easily. Eye infections were particularly common. But swimming was fashionable, so people persisted. Beaches, for those who could access them, were marginally cleaner, being subjected to ocean tides. But sewage outfalls emptied directly onto beaches. People swam near these outfalls in water contaminated with human waste. They got sick. They didn't connect the illness to the swimming. They just remembered the nice day at the beach, conveniently forgetting the week of dysentery that followed. The working conditions in various industries were spectacularly filthy and dangerous. Match factories poisoned workers with phosphorus. Textile mills filled lungs with fibers. Tanneries exposed workers to toxic chemicals and rotting hides. Glue factories rendered animal parts in conditions that were indescribably foul. People worked in these places because they had no choice. The alternative was starvation. Chimney sweeps were children small enough to fit in chimneys. They climbed inside chimneys full of hot soot and toxic fumes. Many died from falls, burns, suffocation, or long-term exposure to carcinogens in soot. They were covered in soot constantly, which was absorbed through skin. They bathed rarely because it was difficult and pointless, when you'd be covered again tomorrow. They died young of scrotal cancer, caused by soot accumulation in the folds of the scrotum. This was known. Child chimney sweeps continued being used until 1875. Coal miners worked underground in darkness, breathing coal dust. Their lungs filled with it. They developed black lung disease and died gasping. They went underground in the morning and emerged at night, covered in coal dust from head to toe. They might wash their faces before eating. They probably didn't. The dust was in their lungs, their pores, their hair, their everything. Mining families were identifiable by the coal dust that never quite washed out. Sailors lived on ships in conditions that were floating nightmares. Hundreds of men packed below decks in spaces that were never properly cleaned. The bilges were filled with stagnant water, rotting food, dead rats, and human waste. The smell was legendary. Sailors slept in hammocks inches apart, sharing air, lice, and diseases. Scurvy killed them when vitamin C ran out. Typhus killed them from lice-borne bacteria. Accidents killed them constantly. Going to sea was often a death sentence, but it paid better than alternatives. Prison conditions were even worse. Prisoners lived in cells designed for one person, but holding 4 or more. There was a bucket for waste. The bucket was emptied when guards remembered. Sometimes days passed. The smell was so bad that guards wouldn't enter cells. Prisoners lived in this, slept in this, ate in this. Disease spread like wildfire. Typhus was called jail fever because it was so common in prisons. Most prisoners left prison sick, if they left at all. Workhouses, the last resort for the desperate poor, were designed to be unpleasant to discourage use. They succeeded. Families were separated immediately. Men, women, and children were housed in different wards and forbidden contact. The food was deliberately inadequate. The work was pointlessly hard. The conditions were prison-like. People died in workhouses regularly of malnutrition, disease, and despair. The workhouse uniforms were rough cloth, barely washed, passed from person to person. You wore a uniform someone had died in. The beds were thin mattresses on boards, one blanket. Shared wards with dozens of others. Privacy didn't exist. Dignity didn't exist. You waited to die in a place designed to punish you for being poor. The children in workhouses had it worst. They were separated from parents, fed starvation rations, worked until exhausted, and beaten for infractions real or imagined. They wore rags, slept in cold dormitories, and died at alarming rates. Child mortality in workhouses was higher than in the worst slums. The workhouses were supposed to be better than streets. They were worse. But they were the only option for families with nowhere else to go. Orphanages were similar. Children packed into buildings with minimal supervision, minimal food, minimal everything. They wore cast-off clothes that didn't fit. They slept in crowded rooms. They were punished harshly and frequently. Diseases spread rapidly in these conditions. Scarlet fever would kill a dozen children in a week. Typhoid would kill more. The survivors were emotionally and physically scarred. The treatment of mental illness was barbaric. Asylums were warehouses for inconvenient people. The mentally ill, the developmentally disabled, the epileptic, the simply difficult, all were locked away in conditions that would break anyone. They were chained to walls, left in their own waste, beaten regularly. Treatment consisted of cold baths, restraints, and sometimes experimental procedures that amounted to torture. The asylum stank of unwashed bodies, excrement, fear. Patients who could have been helped with proper care were destroyed by the care they received. They deteriorated in these places, proving to observers that mental illness was incurable. It wasn't the illness that was incurable. It was the treatment that was destructive. Women were particularly vulnerable to asylum commitment. A husband could commit his wife for being disagreeable. A father could commit a daughter for being too independent. Once committed, getting out was nearly impossible. Women spent decades in asylums for crimes like refusing to be sufficiently obedient. They were never clean, never comfortable, never free. Many died there, buried in unmarked graves in asylum cemeteries. Let's return to personal hygiene practices, because there's more horror to mine. Menstruation was handled with rags, literally. Women used pieces of cloth that were washed and reused. These menstrual rags were rinsed in cold water, sometimes with soap, and hung to dry wherever they could be dried discreetly. They were never truly clean. They carried bacteria. They caused infections. But they were all that was available. Women worked, walked, lived while menstruating with minimal protection. The rags shifted, leaked, failed. Staining clothes was common and shameful. Women developed strategies to hide it: dark skirts, thick petticoats, careful movements. They couldn't stay home because missing work meant losing wages. So they bled through their clothes and tried to pretend they weren't. Menstrual blood was considered shameful and mysterious. Women were told not to bath during menstruation because it would stop the flow and poison them. They were told not to wash their hair or eat certain foods or do various activities. These restrictions were medically nonsense, but culturally enforced. So women spent a week each month unwashed while bleeding, following advice that made everything worse. Childbirth, we've discussed, but postpartum recovery deserves more attention. After giving birth, women were confined to bed for weeks. They weren't allowed to bathe for 6 weeks because of the open pores theory. They lay in beds stained with birth blood, sweating through fevers, bleeding the normal postpartum bleeding, not allowed to clean themselves properly. The smell was overwhelming. The infection risk was astronomical. Many women developed childbed fever in these conditions, created specifically by medical advice, meant to keep them safe. The babies born into this world weren't kept especially clean either. Newborns were wrapped in swaddling, tight bands of cloth that immobilized them. The swaddling was changed when soiled, which was frequently, but the baby wasn't bathed during changes. Just wiped minimally and rewrapped. The swaddling got progressively more soiled until wash day. Diapering involved cloth folded and pinned. The cloth was cotton or linen, washed and reused endlessly. It was rinsed in cold water after each use, sometimes with soap, and hung to dry. By the end of a day, a baby might have gone through a dozen diapers. All of them had to be washed by hand. The mother, recovering from childbirth, exhausted and possibly infected, was expected to manage this while caring for the baby and any other children. Babies who survived infancy graduated to childhood, where hygiene remained optional. Children played in streets filled with horse manure and human waste. They put their hands in their mouths constantly. They got sick constantly. Parents accepted childhood illness as normal. Most children survived. Many didn't. Infant and childhood mortality was so high that parents often didn't name children until they were a year old, waiting to see if they'd survive before getting attached. Children's clothes were passed down through multiple children, washed seasonally. Younger children wore clothes that were already worn thin by older siblings, stained with years of wear. The clothes were too big, then too small, then passed to the next child. The cycle continued until the clothes literally fell apart. Shoes were similar, handed down until they were more whole than shoe. Many children went barefoot because shoes were expensive and children's feet grew quickly. Bare feet in streets full of manure, broken glass, and filth. Cuts were common. Infections followed. Tetanus killed children regularly. A cut from a rusty nail could be a death sentence. School, when children attended, was a disease exchange program. Dozens of children packed into poorly ventilated rooms, all carrying lice, all coughing, all spreading whatever they had to everyone else. Measles swept through schools regularly. Whooping cough killed the youngest. Diphtheria closed schools periodically. Scarlet fever left survivors with damaged hearts. These diseases were considered normal childhood experiences. If you survived, you were stronger. Many didn't survive. Teachers weren't much cleaner than students. They wore the same clothes daily, washing weekly if they were fastidious. They breathed the same air as students, caught the same diseases, worked while sick, because missing work meant no pay. Teaching was exhausting work in terrible conditions, for minimal compensation. Teachers died young of tuberculosis, and other diseases spread in crowded classrooms. The playgrounds, if they existed, were dirt yards where children played the same games children always play, just dirtier. They dug in dirt, fell in dirt, ate dirt occasionally. They fought, which meant rolling around in dirt. They came home filthy, which was expected. Mothers might make them wash their faces before dinner, might not. It depended on how tired the mother was, which was usually very tired. Toys were minimal and filthy. A wooden hoop, rolled through streets with a stick. A ball made of rags. Marbles that were lost in gutters. Dolls made of cloth or wood, never washed. Accumulating years of handling. These toys were precious because they were rare. Children played with them despite the dirt, or because of it. Dirt was just part of playing. Games often involved dirt, making mud pies, digging holes, building things from street debris. Children had elaborate games involving horse manure, using it as building material or ammunition. This seems horrifying now, but was normal then. What else would they play with? Clean toys for clean children in clean environments didn't exist for working-class Victorians. Pets were common and added to the household filth. Cats for rodent control, dogs for companionship and sometimes work. The pets were never bathed, never groomed properly, never treated by veterinarians, unless they were valuable working animals. They had fleas and parasites. They spread these to humans. They slept in beds with people, ate from the same plates, lived in the same spaces. The boundary between human and animal was porous. The cats were often feral or semi-feral, coming and going as they pleased, hunting rats in the streets and alleys. They were covered in street filth, carrying diseases from the rats they caught. They rubbed against people, transferring filth and fleas. They were valued for rat control, but weren't exactly pets in the modern sense. They were working animals that happened to live in the house. Dogs were similarly practical. Guard dogs, herding dogs, ratting dogs, all working animals. They were fed scraps, kept outside or in outbuildings, beaten when they misbehaved. Some were treated better, especially by the wealthy, but even pampered dogs weren't bathed regularly. They smelled like dogs, which is to say, like concentrated dog smell that modern people would find overwhelming. Victorians were used to it. The streets were full of working horses, thousands of them. Each horse produced pounds of manure daily. The manure piled up faster than it could be removed. Crossing sweepers, like your younger self, made livings cleaning paths through the manure. But there were never enough sweepers. Most streets were ankle deep in manure most of the time. The smell was omnipresent. The flies were biblical. The horses themselves were worked until they dropped dead in the streets. Dead horses were left where they fell until removal crews collected them. In hot weather, a dead horse would bloat and rot quickly. The smell was indescribable. Neighbors would complain. Eventually, the carcass would be removed, but not before it had attracted every fly in London and contributed its rotting gases to the general atmosphere. The glue factories and rendering plants where dead horses ended up were hell on earth. The smell was so bad that workers became blind to it, unable to smell anything else. The work involved boiling down carcasses, separating usable parts from waste. The workers were covered in blood and grease and rendered fat. They went home reeking. Their families got used to the smell or moved out. Many workers drank heavily to cope. Many died young. Slaughterhouses were similarly appalling. Animals were killed in conditions that were bloody and chaotic. The blood ran into streets. The offal was piled in corners. The smell attracted predators and scavengers. The workers were covered in blood all day. They might rinse off at a pump after work, might not. They certainly didn't bathe. They went home blood-stained and rank and tried to sleep. The fish markets, the meat markets, the vegetable markets, all contributed their smells to the general miasma. Rotting vegetables, fish guts, animal blood, all mixing in the streets. Market days meant the streets were especially foul. People waded through this to shop, bringing home food that had been sitting in these conditions. They ate it and survived, mostly, because their bodies had adapted to constant low-level food poisoning. Street vendors sold food from carts that were never cleaned properly. The same cart that sold meat pies today sold fish tomorrow, cleaned with a rag and some water if the vendor was conscientious. The pies were made in conditions that would horrify modern health inspectors. Meat of questionable origin, pastry made with cheap flour and water of dubious quality, cooked in ovens that were never cleaned. People ate these pies standing in the street, with filthy hands, and considered it a good meal. Coffee houses and pubs served food and drink in conditions that were barely controlled chaos. Tables were wiped with rags that spread more filth than they removed. Plates were reused without washing, just wiped. Cups were rinsed in a bucket of water that served all day. The food was cooked in kitchens that were dark, dirty, and dangerous. Rats ran through kitchens at night, and sometimes during the day. This was normal. The pubs especially were centers of filth and disease. Men crowded into smoky rooms, drinking beer from glasses that had been in hundreds of mouths. They spat on the floor, which was covered in sawdust to absorb the spit and spilled beer. The sawdust was changed occasionally when it became too soggy to function. The smell was beer and tobacco and sweat and piss, because people pissed in corners when they couldn't be bothered to go outside. Drinking was a major part of Victorian life because alcohol was safer than water. Beer, gin, wine, all had alcohol content that killed bacteria. People drank all day, starting with breakfast. Workers had beer breaks. Children were given watered-down beer. Alcoholism was epidemic, but so was contaminated water, so drinking was a calculated risk. Public drunkenness was common and accepted, especially among the working classes. Men staggered home drunk, fell in gutters, woke up robbed. Women drank secretly or openly, depending on their class. Gin was particularly popular among the poor because it was cheap and effective. The phrase mother's ruin referred to gin, which destroyed families through addiction, but provided temporary escape from the horror of sober existence. The wealthy had wine cellars and drank better quality alcohol in better conditions. But they still drank heavily, just in nicer rooms. Dinner parties involved multiple courses and multiple wines. Men would drink port after dinner until they were drunk. This was sophisticated drinking, but it was still drinking to excess. Gout was common among the wealthy, caused partly by diet, but largely by alcohol consumption. The Victorian class system meant that hygiene varied somewhat by class, but only in degree, not kind. The wealthy were cleaner than the poor, but cleaner is relative. They still lived in houses with chamber pots, cesspits, and arsenic wallpaper. They still rarely bathed. They still died of preventable diseases. Money bought better food, more clothes, nicer coffins. It didn't buy actual cleanliness or health. The middle classes aspired to cleanliness as a marker of respectability. They had servants to carry water, do laundry, empty chamber pots. They could afford to change clothes more often. They had bathrooms, eventually, as plumbing spread. But their servants lived in filthy conditions in the attics and basements. The house might look clean in the public rooms, but the private spaces, the servants' quarters, the kitchens, were as filthy as any poor household. Servants' lives were particularly grim. They worked 18-hour days, 6.5 days a week. They lived in attics or basements that were unheated and poorly ventilated. They ate leftovers from the family's meals, if they were lucky, or separate servant food that was deliberately inferior. They bathed when they could, which was rarely. They wore uniforms that were washed by other servants, who were equally exhausted and busy. Female servants were vulnerable to sexual exploitation by male family members or guests. Pregnancy meant immediate dismissal without references. Single mothers were unemployable in respectable houses. Many ended up in prostitution, which was the only option for unmarried pregnant women, without family support. The cycle of exploitation continued across generations. Prostitution was widespread in Victorian London. Estimates suggest tens of thousands of prostitutes working at any given time. They serviced a client base that ranged from dock workers to nobility. The work was dangerous, degrading, and disease-ridden. Syphilis and gonorrhea were epidemic among prostitutes and their clients. Treatment was mercury-based and often worse than the disease. The prostitutes lived in lodging houses that were marginally better than sleeping rough. They shared beds, shared clothes, shared diseases. They washed when they could, which was rarely. They developed the smell of their profession, cheap perfume, over sweat, over the smell of sex and disease. Clients didn't care. Clients were also filthy. The exchange of bodily fluids happened in alleys, in cheap rooms, in parks. Privacy was minimal. Hygiene was non-existent. Venereal diseases spread through all classes, because men of all classes visited prostitutes. They brought diseases home to their wives. Their wives, having no power to refuse marital relations, became infected. Babies were born with congenital syphilis. The cycle continued. Discussing venereal disease was shameful, so people suffered silently. Treatment was secret and often ineffective. The Contagious Diseases Acts of the 1860s attempted to control venereal disease by requiring prostitutes in certain towns to submit to examinations. The examinations were brutal, performed with unwashed instruments by doctors who didn't care about the women's pain or dignity. Women found to be infected were locked in hospitals until cured, which could take months. Men, the actual source of disease spread, were not examined or restricted. The acts were eventually repealed after feminist activism, but they illustrated the Victorian attitude toward women's bodies: controllable, suspect, less important than men's. The medical profession's treatment of women generally was appalling. Most doctors were men who had never seen a healthy woman's body. They examined women through layers of clothing. They diagnosed by asking questions and making assumptions. They attributed women's complaints to hysteria, which was a catch-all diagnosis for any woman who was unhappy, sick, or simply female. Hysteria treatments included bed rest, forced feeding, isolation, electric shocks, and sometimes surgery. The rest cure involved lying in bed for months, forbidden to read, write, or do anything stimulating. Many women went genuinely insane from this treatment. Others were broken by it, returning to their families docile and defeated, which was the point. Female genital mutilation was practiced by some Victorian doctors to cure hysteria. Clitoridectomies were performed on women whose symptoms ranged from depression to masturbation to simply being difficult. This was considered legitimate medicine. The women had no say. Their husbands or fathers consented. The surgery was done without real anesthetic, improperly, causing lifelong pain and damage. The Victorian obsession with sexual purity created all sorts of hygiene nightmares. Masturbation was considered dangerous, causing insanity, blindness, general moral decay. Boys were fitted with devices to prevent erections. Girls were watched constantly. Both sexes were taught that their bodies were shameful and any pleasure was sinful. This created psychological damage that manifested as sexual dysfunction, anxiety, and a general terror of the body and its functions. Children were kept ignorant of sex until marriage, which meant they had no knowledge of hygiene related to sexual activity. Wedding nights were traumatic for women who had no idea what to expect. Men were encouraged to visit prostitutes to gain experience, which spread disease. The combination of ignorance, shame, and disease created misery for everyone. Menopause was treated as an illness requiring medical intervention. Women going through natural hormonal changes were medicated, institutionalized, or just ignored. The symptoms were attributed to the wandering womb, a medical theory that persisted into the Victorian era, despite being ancient and wrong. Women were prescribed useless treatments and told their suffering was their own fault for being female. Pregnancy and childbirth, as discussed, But worth emphasizing again, women died in horrific numbers from childbed fever, hemorrhage, eclampsia, and other complications that were often preventable. The maternal mortality rate was high across all classes. Giving birth was one of the most dangerous things a woman could do. Most women survived, but barely. Many were permanently damaged by difficult births, prolapses, tears that were never repaired properly, ongoing pain. The children born from these difficult births often died in infancy. The infant mortality rate was shocking, as approximately 1 in 4 children died before their first birthday. The causes were multiple birth complications, untreated illness, malnutrition, accidents, neglect. Parents had large families expecting several children to die. This was normal and expected and horrifying. The children who survived infancy faced constant danger. Accidents were common: falls, drownings, fires, being crushed by carts or wagons. Diseases killed thousands: measles, scarlet fever, whooping cough, diphtheria. Industrial accidents killed children working in factories and mines. Street crime claimed others. Reaching adulthood was an accomplishment. Those who reached adulthood then faced adult dangers: workplace accidents, untreated illness, violence, childbirth for women. Life expectancy at birth was low, around 40 years, but that statistic is skewed by high infant mortality. If you survived to adulthood, you might live to 60 or older. But you'd spend those years in pain, with rotting teeth, bad joints, scarred lungs, and various ailments from a lifetime of poor hygiene and harsh conditions. The elderly, if they survived to become elderly, were not treated well. There was no pension system, no social security. Old people worked until they couldn't, then relied on family or ended up in the workhouse. The workhouse for the elderly was a place to wait for death. Conditions were deliberately harsh to discourage use. The elderly lived in shared wards, poorly fed, poorly heated, poorly treated until they died. Death, when it came, was often at home. People died in their beds, in the same rooms where they'd lived. The corpse would be laid out for viewing. Neighbors would visit to pay respects. The corpse would be in the house for days, until the funeral. In hot weather, this was problematic. The smell of decomposition filled the house. Families just endured it because what else could they do? Funerals were as elaborate as the family could afford. The poor had pauper burials, multiple bodies in one grave, no marker. The working classes saved in burial clubs to avoid pauper graves. The wealthy had elaborate funerals with black horses and professional mourners and expensive coffins. But everyone ended up in the ground eventually, in crowded graveyards where bodies were stacked deep. The graveyards themselves were overcrowded and poorly managed. Bodies were buried too shallow. Decomposition contaminated groundwater. Bones worked their way to the surface. The smell from graveyards was notable. Grave robbers dug up fresh corpses to sell to medical schools. The trade in corpses was brisk and mostly illegal, but necessary because doctors needed bodies for dissection and studying. The medical schools received these stolen corpses and used them for education. The students, future doctors, learned anatomy by dissecting bodies that had been stolen from graves. The corpses were not fresh, not clean, not preserved properly. They were decomposing as students cut into them. The smell in anatomy theatres was legendary. Students fainted regularly. But this was how doctors learned, so it continued. The cycle of Victorian life was born dirty, live dirty, die dirty, be buried in dirt. Cleanliness was an impossible dream for most people. Water was scarce and unsafe. Soap was expensive. Time was limited. Knowledge was wrong. The medical establishment actively opposed practices that would have saved lives. The economic system required people to work themselves to death in filthy conditions. The social system blamed the poor for being poor and dirty, ignoring that the system created and maintained their poverty and filth. Looking back from the 21st century, Victorian hygiene is shocking. We have clean water, soap, washing machines, showers, antibiotics, understanding of germ theory, public health systems. We take for granted things that would have seemed like miracles to Victorians: brushing teeth daily, showering daily, washing clothes after one wearing, having enough water to use carelessly. But the Victorians didn't know what they were missing. They lived in their filth, because everyone lived in filth. It was normal. The smell was normal. The disease was normal. The early death was normal. They looked at their world and saw progress, railways, factories, empire, wealth. They didn't see the filth they were living in, because they had nothing clean to compare it to. Some Victorians did push for reform. Public health advocates documented the living conditions of the poor and demanded change. Doctors like John Snow and Ignaz Semmelweis proved that hygiene prevented disease. Engineers like Joseph Bazalgette built infrastructure that improved sanitation. Reformers fought for clean water, better housing, workplace safety, public health measures. Progress happened, slowly, against fierce resistance. The wealthy didn't want to pay for sewers that served the poor. Doctors didn't want to admit their hands were dirty. Factory owners didn't want to improve working conditions. Landlords didn't want to build better housing. Change required forcing people to care about other people's suffering, which is always difficult. By the end of the Victorian era, in 1901, things were marginally better. Sewers existed in major cities. Water quality had improved somewhat. Germ theory was accepted. Hand washing was becoming standard medical practice. Death rates were dropping. But the change was slow and incomplete. Many Victorians died without ever experiencing real cleanliness. Your life, from birth to death at 22, encompassed the full horror of Victorian hygiene. You were born in filth, lived in filth, and died in filth. You never knew what it meant to be truly clean. You never drank pure water or breathed clean air. You never lived in a home that wasn't toxic. You worked yourself to death in conditions that should have been criminal. You lost a wife and child to diseases that were preventable. You died young in a workhouse, unmourned and unremembered. This was ordinary life for ordinary people in the Victorian era. Not exceptional, not particularly tragic by Victorian standards. Just normal. This was how millions of people lived and died. They endured suffering that we can barely imagine. They survived. When they survived, through toughness and luck, and a high tolerance for misery. The Victorians built the modern world on the backs of people like you, expendable, exploitable, forgotten. The grand buildings and engineering marvels and industrial progress were achieved by people who died young in filth. The empire that ruled a quarter of the world was built by people who couldn't keep themselves clean. The greatest civilization in the world, as the British called themselves, was a civilization swimming in its own waste. This is the truth of Victorian hygiene. It barely existed. What passed for cleanliness was filth by any modern standard. What passed for normal was horrific. What passed for acceptable was unconscionable. The Victorians lived in a world where dirt was inevitable, disease was constant, and death was always close. They accepted this because they had no choice. They made the best of impossible conditions. They survived when they could and died when they couldn't. And through it all, they rarely bathed.